Amen. And I will now call to order. I don't have my gavel, but I'll call to order the workshop meeting, that's okay, of June 20th, 2023. Our first item on our agenda is to review the draft agenda for the June 29th meeting. Do we have citizens here outside of the district? I don't think so. So I'll skip the introduction to how to make presentations. Go ahead, Mr. Boston.
Okay, welcome to sunny Florida. Okay, great day today. You know, one of my favorite questions, just to start off with a brief overview, one of my favorite questions is, what do you do all summer? Like, it's a question that we get, like, the implication is that we're not doing anything during summertime. Let me just remind the board what we've done so far. Right after the last day of teachers, we started summer leadership. So summer leadership is all administrators in the district got together. We talked about engagement, focusing on student data, teacher support, engaging with our families, safety, professional learning communities, among other topics during the 2 full days of training. We had One Clay Leadership Academy, which is literally hundreds of teacher leaders willing to come in during the summertime and improve their capacity in the area of improving PLCs. The real power of teachers being leaders is recognized by this district, and that's what that training was about. We also had the ESE Summer Summit, which is, you know, I always said that organizations should be judged by how they treat those that are the most needy, not those that require the least amount of effort or need. And we're proud of our efforts in ESE, and topics there included a variety, including how to include our vision for instruction and the fact that all means all of our students. In addition to that, we're hiring teachers for the next school year. In case you missed it, we had a wonderful Flag Day ceremony. The county office, very proud of that. And then the opening of Spring Park should occur this week, as far as the ability to move in. There's a change order on this particular document. So a lot going on during the summertime. In fact, summer usually, especially for human resources, one of the busiest times of the year is in fact summertime. So with that in mind, I'll kind of review the agenda. I see several presentations during this agenda. First one is retirees, 117 retirees. That's 2,580 combined years of service. So typically we hire about anywhere from 350 to 400 teachers a year. That's a normal year. We're actually at a lower number this year than in previous years as far as the number of teachers needed. There's no doubt there's still a teacher shortage, and we continue to search for teachers. And in fact, we'll talk later about providing capacity for those that become teachers and are new to the profession. So then the very first item is the minutes. I assume there's no issues there. The second second and third is the membership dues for FADS and for FSBA. Those are required to be agenda items. Next, we have the personnel consent agenda. You know, of course, that'll be updated certainly before the 48-hour rules. Next, we have academic services, out-of-state and overnight travel. Pretty typical stuff there. Next is our agreement with AMI Kids. For those of you that have never been out to see AMI Kids, great program. 44 students participate in that program. These are for young men that perhaps don't fit into the traditional environment. One of the things that I've always said is that you have to have choices for parents when students don't fit the traditional mold. And these are certainly students that don't. It's a great program that was rated as commendable. So in DJJ programs, the highest rating, the highest ranking to be an A school is called commendable. And AMI Kids is a commendable program in accordance with DJJ rules. You know, sometimes the road is not a straight path for some students. There's twists and turns, and they deal with those twists and turns. Maria, of course, was at our school board meeting. I don't know if you remember Maria receiving an award from DJJ at a recent board meeting. Next is the letters program. We've had comments previously related to letters, which stands for Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling. You know that it's focused on the science of reading, which is the state emphasis on that. I will give kudos to Ms. Tito, the folks in elementary ed, because we started down that path long before the state put it into legislation. This year, there's legislation talking about the science of reading and getting away from 3Q philosophy. We started that a couple years ago. Prior to that, we feel like we're on the right track when it comes to literacy. And this is the program that helps teachers on the secondary level. We're talking about intensive reading teachers primarily. The elementary level, we're talking about any teacher that has tier 3 through the MTSS process. Next, we have out-of-state and overnight field trips. You know, our CTE program does a great job, tells you like a year ahead of time when they're going out of state or when they're going to travel, because those dates have already been determined. We don't know if students are going to qualify yet for that, but they want to be upfront and say, hey, students might be going to these as a result of their performance. Next, we have the library book committee recommendations. We're going to do that at the end because we have a whole presentation and discussion related to that topic, so I'll skip over that one. Next, we have an MOU with the Department of Health, which provides 11 extra nurses in our schools. This is kind of exciting. This is a federal grant, so the MOU is about, we would have people that work for the Department of Health in our schools, because they're not our employees, hence the need for an MOU related to that. So the schools that will receive some extra help: Wilkinson Junior, Argyle, Oakleaf Junior, Lake Asbury, Middleburg, Lake Asbury Junior, OPH, Lakeside Elementary, Doe McRae, and Clay Charter will all receive an extra funded by a federal grant. Next, we have Workman's Comp, St. John's, or John's Eastern Company. You can see it's the renewal of that particular program. In the insurance world, let me ask a quick question. The board's looking a little like it's raining outside. Okay, I can tell everybody's like, okay, yeah, whatever. That's one of the next thing, right? Insurance. I could believe it. How many have ever seen insurance go down?
This year.
Yeah. Okay, everybody's watching what's happened with property insurance and other types of insurance. Our medical insurance is based on our claims rate, and that has gone down. It is a moment of pride. But insurance, not cheap. So there's our workman's comp insurance. Next, to kind of tee this up, okay, we do have a guest here from Gallagher. This is Jory, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Vandervoort. Vandervoort.
Close.
Vandervoort, talking about our renewal of our insurance program. You're up.
Where do you want me? Up there?
Either way, yeah, it might be easier for you to stand up front there.
Ecological place. Make sure I know what I'm doing here. Okay. Good morning. My name is Jory Vandervoort. I'm with Gallagher. It's nice to see you all again. I seem to come about once a year to come and speak to you about the insurance. And, you know, I always like to be able to come with decreases, but, you know, the market itself has been a bit challenging this year. We do have a couple lines of coverage that we saw some rate stability in, but as I was just alluding to, the property marketplace is certainly in one of its hardest markets that I've seen in probably the 30 years that I've been in this business. So with that said, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Unlike in years past, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the marketplace so that everybody gets a little more comfortable before we look at some of the options that we've put together for you. From a state of the insurance marketplace, and this is all lines of coverage, We're just seeing unprecedented impacts across all lines of coverage right now. Obviously, the biggest one, the one that we see the most in Florida, would be the property insurance, the risk and storm frequency and losses. Not only has that been a nationwide issue, but certainly with Hurricane Ian coming through the West Coast last summer, or last fall, as a matter of fact, that certainly, dampened any hopes for some, to see any rates going down. Cyber threats have been an issue throughout the industry as well. The global supply chain, that it affects everything, whether it's property, liability, any types of claims, trying to get claims fixed, property claims fixed, or even casualty, things of that nature. That's going to affect it. The social inflation, so we see nuclear verdicts. We just had a client, a private company client, that they had a slip and fall in one of their bathrooms, and there's a $4 million verdict. So we start seeing things of that nature happen. That's certainly going to affect casualty lines of coverage. Employment practices liability. You've got between the Me Too movement, the diversity and equity, all those types of things have just brought a much greater focus onto our employment practices and those types of claims as well. We talk about the workers' comp. You were just saying that some of the costs are going down, and that actually is an area from the workers' compensation insurance that we saw a positive impact this year. Inflationary trends, distracted driving, that's going to affect auto liability as well. I'm not sure what I did there.
Bonnie, you'll have to redo the slide show.
I mean, I can go from here, but I don't know.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Put that down. So as I was mentioning about the property marketplace, last year when I was here, we were talking about rate increases, and at that time we had seen, we certainly had a little bit of a rate increase for you guys, but at that time we were also seeing an increase because we had increased your property values, because carriers will expect that you insure your properties to value. But we were hoping at that point that we were going to start seeing some stabilization in the property market. But as I mentioned at the onset here, Hurricane Ian really dashed any hopes of that. At this point, the modelers stand the loss for Hurricane Ian, and if you think about that, that's just in Florida alone, down in that southwest quadrant of Florida, is estimated at over $60 billion from a loss standpoint. And that's some of your peers as well had some significant, some of the districts down there had some significant property losses. So when we put that into perspective, because a lot of times people like to talk about Hurricane Andrew, if you're from South Florida, or we like to talk about Katrina being some of the costliest one. Hurricane Ian is now going to overtake Hurricane Katrina being the most costliest storm out there. So that just helps sort of put the marketplace into perspective about that. But this is always an interesting chart because it just shows the 22 most costliest disasters, with Hurricane Ian now taking over the top spot, and unfortunately being the most recent loss as well. So what does that mean from a property market standpoint? As I mentioned last year, the good news for you guys is that last year we did a real big exercise on bringing your property values up to a better level. Your values had been a little bit undervalued, and so we did that last year. We've also increased the values again this year to make sure that we're staying on pace with those inflationary trends. But some of your peers that haven't been doing that are seeing their rate increases and property rates increasing even more significantly than what you have happening this year. So at this point, the carriers, because they're in a position where they want to see the best submissions, they're only going to write the best companies, the best districts out there. So they have they have a zero tolerance policy. They want the information a certain way, and if we don't give it to them, then they really aren't going to do much for us. So we have those types of issues. there's a lot of competition. They're getting hundreds of submissions on a day-to-day basis. So quality information, which you guys are providing to us, helps get us into the best position possible going into the negotiations with them. Currently, there's less capacity, so it starts going at more of a premium. And then, as I mentioned, the scrutiny of those replacement cost valuations. And then we see some changes in the deductible structures as well as terms and conditions. The good news is for your program, we've been able to maintain all the same terms and conditions. We didn't have to give anything up in order to be able to place the entire program. Somehow or another, that got to the right spot. Are there any questions at this point?
I'm just curious, how similar as far as your carriers compared to residential and commercial? I mean, are you seeing the same impact and the reduction of carriers to go with?
You mean, are the residential markets?
Well, I didn't know if the casualty, if you were seeing the same loss of providers and carriers.
We work with there's a different marketplace from a residential
Right.
property
But
standpoint.
are you seeing about the same as far as the loss of, in other words, if they're down by 50% in the carriers, are you seeing about the same thing?
I would say generally speaking, yes. I don't on a day-to-day basis work in the residential marketplace, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds on what they're doing, but I certainly could get more information for you if you needed it.
I was hoping you were just in a better market than what the state of Florida is.
I know my own property rates have gone up rather significantly too.
31%.
So from a casualty, we've been talking mostly about property because property is certainly one of your biggest items, but casualty is as well. So we're seeing just, I'm trying to go through these different lines of coverage just to give you a general feel for what's going on out there. From a casualty coverage, we have general liability. So general liability is like the slips and falls, things of that nature. Kids get injured on the playground, that type of thing. So we're seeing, what we see there is, like more moderate in terms of rate increases, but somewhere between 5 and 15%. But what we are seeing in that aspect, and this doesn't really apply so much to the school to play, but in general, because of like those nuclear verdicts that I was mentioning, those excess limits, companies that are buying significantly large liability limits are getting those limits cut as well because the cost of that insurance has risen rather significantly. The public officials and employment practices liability, also known as school board legal liability, that's those insured coverage, but it's also the employment practices, wrongful termination, those types of claims. So we're seeing that market, somewhat stabilized, but definitely, not seeing any increase or decreases from there. Sexual abuse and molestation coverage, that also falls into the general liability categories, and we're seeing that continues to be difficult as well. And then, as I mentioned earlier, from an auto liability standpoint, the distracted driving, things of that nature. But keep in mind, with the property, with Hurricane Ian last year, there's estimates out there that Hurricane Ian damaged up to over 350,000 vehicles down there. So it wasn't just the property carriers that are paying claims, it's the auto liability, the auto carriers that are also paying those claims. So if you're seeing your own personal auto increasing, you can certainly, that would be a reason why. And then we still see some of the excess workers' compensation increasing. We actually had some stabilization there with Clay Schools this year. I'm sorry, just one moment. So from a snapshot standpoint, and this is not the only thing that carriers look at, but this is just a real broad bird's eye view of your program from last year to this year. If all things were to remain the same, if we were able to get every single one of your policies to renew with the expiring rate, so if you were able to have the same rate as the expiring, the carriers would still look at your exposure changes. So you could still see increases come about just by virtue of the fact that the exposures increase. Not necessarily a dollar for dollar, but again, you would see just because your exposure base increases, just like if your homeowner, the value of your home increases and the rate stays the same, you're going to see that price bump up a little bit just because the value of the home has increased. So when we looked, this is all information that came from the district that was given to us. And when we looked at the property, we found that the property values had about a 9% change. The GOE, the gross operating expenditures, that was up about 27%. We have payrolls that are up 8%. The student count is up. Everything's up a little bit. So from a marketing standpoint this year, so when I'll start getting a little bit more into your renewal. First and foremost, we're still working on it. We've got most of the quotes in, and we'll show this to you today. But we do, regardless of what we discuss here, we continue to work on it all the way up until the program renews, which is on June 30th. So over the next couple of weeks is when we're able to fine tune and bring the numbers down. So at this point, we've approached about 50 companies. We've used our relationships, capacity, we've put together great submissions on your behalf to be able to meet with and go through all of that detail with them. 16 have provided quotes and indications that you'll see here today. But like I said, we have many carriers, especially on the property piece, that are still renewing the program as well. So we might be able to pull some people out and replace some different property carriers. Because when it does come to your property program, unlike your own homeowner's insurance where you have one carrier putting it together, when it comes to the property program, it's a multi-layered quota share program that has, upwards of 8 to 10 insurance carriers providing different levels of coverage. Let's try this again. So I always put this slide in here just as a reminder because we keep talking a little bit about the homeowner's coverage. And so typically when you're talking about your own homeowner, your residential insurance or even your business insurance, you're more than likely over here in what we call this conventional insurance program, which is a first dollar program, small, very low deductibles, and a lot of insurance. If you have a claim, you have the claim, and you call the insurance company hires an adjuster, the adjuster comes out and they take complete control and you have very little say in the final adjustment of the claim. And so what we like to do with our clients, and we have clients that do those conventional insurance programs, but with most of our school district, public entity clients, especially in the state of Florida, we really encourage that you take more control, take greater control of your claims, which is why you actually have John's Eastern, which is your claims administrator, and you buy less insurance. So we try to get you to buy the least amount of coverage and control most of the claims yourself, but only buy in excess. So there are these different types of dividend and deductible programs. There's called protected self-insurance, where ultimately you would stop paying self-insured retentions. You used to have that program, you moved a little bit further along the control continuum, and you have what we call a specific excess insurance program. So the good news is that you are doing a good job of it. You're handling the workers' compensation, the casualty claims, even, a lot of different property claims. But if you do have a large catastrophic property claim, you have insurance carriers that come in to pay that. So very quickly, and I know that this is really hard to read, probably even on your own screens, But this is how we structure the program. I think the key to be able to read it and understand it is anything that's in yellow is a deductible or a retention for the district, and anything in the colored boxes above that is the insurance that you're purchasing. So for your property, you have a $100,000 property retention for everything except for wind. Your wind is a 10% named windstorm deductible. From the liability, which was the general liability, so slips and falls, also the school board legal liability, things of that nature, sexual abuse, different liability type coverages. You have a $200,000 self-insured retention for those. Then you move a little bit further over, there's the workers' compensation. We talk about taking on larger self-insured retentions. You guys have a $500,000 self-insured retention. All of these you're buying coverage on top of that. And then we have equipment breakdown coverage, storage tank liability, and then our active assailant coverages as well. So, cutting to the chase, this is where we are at as of today, as I mentioned. So, in trying to make it easier for discussion purposes, I just put numbers up at the top of the columns there. So, the column number 1 is the expiring premiums that you have. Column number 2 is the renewal for the same terms and conditions, no changes at all. That's your apples to apples comparison. And then column number 3, we came up with an alternate option for you, which was to actually purchase a little bit less wind coverage. We work with a lot of school districts throughout the state of Florida, as well as other public entities. And, one of the things that I was doing before I came here was sort of benchmarking and reviewing sort of where your renewal was coming at versus theirs. Or everybody else. Is what I would tell you is that most people to date are looking at reducing their wind coverage a little bit and just saying we can't spend all our money on insurance. We do have other things that we need to spend it on, and so trying to cut that down to somewhat of a reasonable area. So we did look at that, and I would tell you that currently from a wind standpoint you have $20 million of named windstorm, so it has to be a massive storm. You have all other perils coverage up to $50 million, so that certainly covers if there's a fire at one of your schools. So, when we're talking about cutting limits, we're talking specifically about the wind coverage and not the whole property program. So one of the things that we also look at, to help put things into a little perspective for you, sort of where you're at, where are you going, where have you been? If you look back in 2013, we're buying $11 million of wind coverage. And as the market started to improve, the prices were coming down, we were slowly able to buy some additional wind coverage at a reasonable price, and we've been keeping that. Now the question becomes, is the $20 million not at a reasonable price anymore? So do we want to cut it back down to, somewhere around the $14 million? So I know a lot of times when we're making these types of decisions, we like to see, where we've been, where are we going, and certainly what are our peers doing as well. So as I mentioned to Susan, you try to buy what you can and what's reasonable in a soft market, and sometimes that's a lot more than what you're looking at now. And in a hard market, you try to do the same, which is buy what's reasonable, buy what you can, recognizing that there's other factors besides just purchasing insurance that go along with the decisions that you have to make.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
And I don't know who to direct it to. How often have we had a claim for a named windstorm? When has that happened in the past 10 years?
Not that I can recall.
We've never done that.
Not since I've been here.
Okay.
Right, and that's part of the discussions that we have
Yeah.
as well. So the claims that you have had have been reimbursed, have been deductible claims, and the monies have been reimbursed by FEMA. So there's definitely that piece of it that you want to be evaluating.
Okay.
Which is another reason why we look at, okay, well, you know, what's a reasonable spend and how much can you buy for that amount?
Right.
And it might not match exactly what you have
Right.
last year.
And the deductible on wind is,
So the deductible is the same, is 10%, and that's really on the high side. What we're not gonna see, some people have 5% deductible, 7.5%, we're way at the higher end of a wind deductible standpoint. So our options at this point are, the biggest bang for the buck is when you start cutting the limit, the wind limit down. 'Cause, this is where it starts getting extremely expensive. Because when you look at a wind model, when we look at, I didn't put the wind model in, so I apologize for that, I should have. You know, your wind, which it would suggest that in the event of a very large catastrophic storm, and you have not had a large catastrophic storm come through, that the estimated loss could range anywhere between 20 to 30 million. So,
Because generally, in this part of Florida, the damage we incur is usually, if it's a severe hurricane, it's usually flooding or,
Yeah.
you know, the wind speeds don't get to the point that they do on the coast.
yeah, I mean, certainly history would support that, you know, and so then, you know, playing devil's advocate, the only other piece is, well, you haven't had the big one yet, so,
Right.
we don't have that luxury of that, you know, foresight, but, you know, from a historical standpoint, it would certainly help support that decision.
I have a question. Was there any damage done to like any of the Flamin Island schools last season during any of the hurricanes at all with wind or anything like that? Okay. I was just wondering because I know the winds were a lot worse on certain areas. And if it didn't affect them, then
the thing about that last storm was that it was sustained wind, which typically you get gusts but not sustained. And they really thought there would be much more damage. I just remember being at the EOC during that. That was always the talk of what happens if you have sustained winds for a long period of time. A lot of trees, a lot of stuff would go down. And didn't have any school damage. That's good.
Okay. That's what I was wondering.
The problem with insurance, of course, is there's no guarantees. That's
Right.
why they call it insurance, right?
Yeah, because all it takes is being on the backside of a bad storm as large as their
Yeah, exactly.
the 1800s have going back.
We were affected more than most of the county where we lived, so that's why I was wondering if, with wind.
You know, they're good questions, and, you know, those are the things that we look at when trying to evaluate, you know, where to go with it, but, you know, the pricing that I was showing you, we don't expect it, you know, we're still working on some of it, but we don't expect it to go above that, so we're gonna continue to working on it. We'll have it fine-tuned by the time it gets put on the agenda for the approval in a couple weeks. Is there any other questions?
Well, I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway, so you can say this. Is this the best that we can do as far as cost goes?
Yeah, for right now, I would say, you know, definitely when I have benchmarked it against your peers in both this area and throughout the state of Florida. It's hard for me to say this and hope that you believe it, but you're actually on the lower end of those increases. I know of other accounts that are getting 100% increases and having to see their capacity cut as well,
So that was very helpful. We couldn't have rehearsed that. In other words,
So, you know, like I said, it's hard for me to, you know, sit up here, you know, with what I consider, you know, pretty significant increases, but when I do know that, you know, your other peers are seeing some more difficult renewals than what you're seeing, you know, and you could look at theirs and they might say, well, mine was a 30% increase. Yeah, but you went from, you know, having $100 million worth of coverage down to 20 million, you know, so there's a lot of different moving parts, but I can tell you all your peers are having to have these types of conversations and these types of decisions, and it's just not a smooth sailing renewal this year, unfortunately. Okay.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Let me get this back to something. I'm terrible with that thing.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay, so back to the agenda. In all my excitement, I skipped one item at the beginning. It's number 4 in my book, which is the EduPoint contract. It actually reflects a decrease. How many times do you have a decrease in anything? $10,558. Remember, EduPoint is a program that the board purchased in 2019. We had our first year in that during the 1920 school year, and then of course we had COVID and all of those things occurring at that time. The go-live date for that program was July 1st of 2021. We added, in 21-22, we added analytics to the program. And then 22-23, we actually saw the first cost reduction. And so that item is simply noting the $10,558 decrease in cost for the program. So then that brings us to 15. Which is Power School. Remember, Power School is a big tech company. They provide our ERP software, which is called Business Plus. They also provide Elevate, which is our evaluation program for teachers, as well as Talent Ed Hire, which is our HR program for hiring folks. And so that's the renewal of that contract that you see there. I believe that's 14 in my book. 15 proposed allocation changes there. You can see it's actually a reduction to general fund and one ESC behavioral health assistant in federal funding. Next, we got the monthly financial reports, followed by the budget amendments, deletion of certain items, and then you have the bid award for ESC services. This is for sign language, speech, mental, behavioral, occupational, and physical therapy services throughout the district. And you can see the companies that were awarded the bid on that item. Next is the district print center equipment refresh. We currently lease 3 different Xerox machines that the district leases in order to produce publications. And so this would be a renewal of the lease for those 3 particular machines.
There is a savings there too, just so you know.
How much is the savings now?
We're going from $11,351 per month to $9,613.30 per month. So there is a savings there. Not only that, we're refreshing the machines so that we're able to keep up with the demands of all the printing. And we're getting rid of 3 really old presses. I mean, you should see those things. I'm afraid. So we're removing those, and the machines that we're getting now, we're replacing them with updated machines to where they can do the envelopes and the printing of the, so we're modernizing the print shop and a savings to boot. There you go. Thank you.
You're doing a really good job, Doug.
Thank you.
Really.
This card caught on quick. Right.
There you go.
Next, we have our interlocal agreements with Green Cove Springs Police Department and Orange Park Police Department. In Green Cove Springs Police Department, we have Charles E. Bennett, Green Cove Jr., as well as the 4 communication officers at dispatch. And in Orange Park, you've got Grove Park, Orange Park Elementary, and Orange Park Junior High. Next is our MOU with the county for emergency shelters. You may not know this, but we open up shelters frequently, every year. So the schools that are primarily shelters, by the way, we've got 19 schools that are shelters. Typically, though, it comes down to 5 schools that wind up bearing the brunt of shelter duty. Clay High School, Keystone Heights High School, Lake Asbury Junior High, which is our special needs shelter, Orange Park High School, and Wilkinson Elementary School. So typically, when there's an emergency and closing schools happen, those are the schools that are usually impacted. If we needed to, we could expand to the other schools because they're under SRAF wind. They're able to withstand the wind and can be used as shelters, but typically it comes down to those schools in particular. The question would be, how many times have we done this? So in 16, we had Hermine and Matthews twice in that year. 17, you had Irma. 22, you had Ian and Nicole, all openings for that. And it becomes a challenge because the decision to do that is made on many factors, including our partnership with the county to in fact provide emergency sheltering for individuals. So there are times where it becomes challenging because you want to perhaps have school to a certain time, but you might have to close the school a little earlier in order to set up the shelter operations, in case you're wondering, like, hey, why did we go into a shelter mode earlier than I would have, because I don't see it happening, like right now. But in order to do that, like to set up a shelter at Lake Asbury Junior High in the cafeteria for people with special medical needs requires truckloads of equipment get moved into that cafeteria in order to take care of those folks when they come. So just a little background into that. And I'm very thankful to the administrators, cafeteria folks, and others that go and work, during this time, especially if it's bad storm and their family is home and they're actually sleeping at school, to help our community. So that's what that item is about. The next two items are inspections. So someone might ask, well, how do you know that the physical environment that students are around are safe, meaning from health and those kinds of things? Well, we have the Department of Health does sanitation inspections of our facilities. Right? That's the first document that you see there. It notes all of the deficiencies that need to be corrected, and then the district goes ahead and corrects those deficiencies. That's how, so that group comes in and does an inspection. We also, at the next item after that, is our SREF, Casual Safety Sanitation Relocatable and Fire Safety Report, which would, again, note deficiencies that were noted, and then they're signed off that they've been completed or corrected. And then each year, there's another cycle of things that we go ahead and we correct. So that's what those two items are about. You can see they're large
Mr.
items.
Brodsky, with both of those, if there's findings, you have to correct those before they'll sign off on the original inspection, or you have to have a re-inspection?
They do a re-inspection, so they go back and see if it's been corrected.
Okay.
We internally do that. They sign off that it's been completed.
Okay.
Next is bus purchases. So we're asking the board to continue to make, just like computers, buses have to be refreshed. I told you we do 3.7 million miles a year. Well, that adds up on the buses. So currently, I found this interesting, but I'm kind of like that with numbers. Of course, it's the number of miles. It's not the age of the bus that really counts. It's the number of miles on a bus. So we have 82 buses with 50,000 miles or less on the bus. That's pretty good, right? The average where they start to say, hey, you should look at replacing that bus or taking it out of active service is 150,000. It's kind of the industry standard on a bus. 20 buses from 50 to 75,000, 26 from 75 to 100,000, 27 buses, 100 to 125,000 miles on it. 16 buses with 125 to 150, 18 buses with 150 to 175, 16 buses from 175 to 200, 25 buses from 200 to 225, 10 buses from 225 to 250, right? So the good news is those buses that you see it with the high mileage are not in the everyday routes that students are involved with, but they're on our inventory, thus the need to refresh each year. I will tell you that buses are not, they're not cheap either. If you look at the price tag on this, which is why you see that, I think it's 1.6 $1 million. And a 77 passenger bus, typically it's about 145 grand per bus. Okay, but we obviously need to replace it.
Well, thank you for not pushing electric,
Yeah,
Not for sure.
not pushing electric at the price.
Oh, okay. You said it's 145 a bus? It used to be 100. That's what
yeah, the cost continues to skyrocket.
That's some crazy inflation.
So the next item is Clay County Utility Authority, the closeout documents for Spring Park Elementary School. Basically, we're taking it over. Next, we have the pre-qualification of contractors. Next, we have a resolution to purchase land out on Russell Road, and to give a brief presentation on that is Mr. Addison.
Thank you, Mr. Roski. Good morning, board members. It seems like every time I get up here, the weather is horrible. I'm starting to get self-conscious about this. Am I bringing over the dark clouds here? So, as you all know, we're growing substantially, especially in the Lake Asbury area. So, our presentation objectives today, we're going to look at land overview of the property that I am proposing. Lake Asbury growth, our school projections in the area, and go over some questions if you have any. So the land location, the overview, if you know the triangle between Sandridge, and then you go north on Henley, and then go to Russell and come back down south, Russell Road, back down to Sandridge, that's the triangle. This piece of property is 95 acres. It is north of Sandridge on the eastern side of that triangle and south of Henley. So it's right in between there. It's just above Annabelle Island. So that's the location of the property. It's 95 plus acres on the property. It's a very large piece of property. It takes a lot of property to build schools. Any questions about the location? Can everybody kind of picture where that is? I had to look into, we're required by interlocal agreement, I have to look into the zoning and future land use of the property before we can even consider it. So I did get in touch with the county. I talked to the county planning department, and the land use is consistent and the zoning is also consistent. We will not have to, if we are to purchase the property, we will not have to do any rezoning or future land use changes to be able to build a school on that property. I don't know what happened there. Okay. The reason I put this up here, I wanted to give you a couple of numbers. Our average distance between elementary schools in the county is about 1.6 miles. So in between our schools, closest distance average is about 1.6 miles. The closest school that we have is about 0.68 of a mile. So looking at this, if you can see that Lake Asbury Elementary is right here, Spring Park is right here, and Rideout is up here. With all the growth we have in the area, we really don't have a lot of schools in the area per se to look at. If you look at the distances between the schools. So as those areas start to fill up, and I'll show you the construction in the area, you can see even if we buy this property, we're still at 3.7, 5.2, and 6.2 miles. It's still well over the average of what our of the vicinity and the distance of the schools that we have in the county, in the district, excuse me. Okay, Lake Asbury growth. You guys know my, what do you call them? Terry, what was it, my Monopoly houses, yeah. My Monopoly houses, the larger the Monopoly house, the bigger the development. As you can see, our projected on day one enrollment, Lake Asbury is at 86.9. Lake Asbury this previous year was about 101 to 104. Obviously, we did some rezoning because of the new school. It's going to bring it down, we hope, to about, well, it will be about 86.9. Rideout was at about 77. Because of the rezoning, we put some students in Rideout. It's going to bring it up to about 89.5. And we expect Spring Park to open at about 77 to allow for more growth in that area. What does that mean? Well, we're still at the mid-80s, low 90s. We're still at that percentage. We're still going to have, there's still a lot of basically growth in the area, and those schools will continue to fill as we keep growing. So yes, we did put a slight Band-Aid on it by opening the new school, but as Saratoga Springs comes online, that new school will fill up. As these houses as they continue to come online, our other schools are going to continue to fill up also. So we're going to get back to the 100% is what I'm getting at. I don't know what that was to do that. Okay. At those percentages, as you can see, the schools, this is what we'll have available on day one. These are the amount of seats that we should have available on day one of this year. 127 seats in Lake Asbury, Rideout 72, and Spring Park at about 201. That gives us about a total of 400 seats. Well, at 12,000 potential homes in the area, that equates to about 3,000 elementary students. So as you can see, we don't have a lot of seats available for the long term as all these houses continue to build and as they continue to grow in that area. All right, I love this slide, all right? This is a new program that I have, and I love it. It's Active Construction AI, Artificial Intelligence. So what they do is it shows where all the active construction is in the area. This is the Lake Asbury area. Everywhere you see pink is active construction going on right now, as we speak. It does not differentiate between residential and commercial. That's why you see the construction on the expressway. However, Lake Asbury only has one piece of commercial property. That's the Winn-Dixie over on Henley. That's it. So everything else over there that you're looking at, and this is the commercial right here. There's no construction going on right here. Everything else that you see is all active construction going on in the area. Now with that being said, you remember our little houses, right? All of this will fill up. All of this will fill up. All of this will fill up. I think the Watkins are going to win theirs. All of that's going to fill up. Eventually, within the 10 to 20 year mark, that will be completely full of houses. So that's a lot of houses coming online. We have to be prepared and have availability of resources to be able to accommodate the students that will come online. We have to be able to put students in seats. Okay. The overall growth summary for the long range, about 12,000 homes in Saratoga and Lake Asbury. That equates to about 3,000, almost 3,100 elementary students. 970 junior high and 1,900 high school students for a total of 5,940 students in the long range plan. At the current moment, we don't have any other property in the area. We do have property in Saratoga Springs, that's a little bit south. However, as you know, Saratoga Springs doesn't have any infrastructure to date. We can't put a school there if we don't have the infrastructure to be able to put the school there. So until that infrastructure comes online, and maybe that's, we don't really know exactly right now, they've run into a couple of roadblocks. Until that infrastructure comes online, then we can't do anything on that property anyway. Okay, so the summary is the initial asking price of the property was about $7.5 million. Our agreed upon price, and it's unofficial, we can't do anything until we have your approval, is 6.5 million. The cost per acre is about 67,000. And the estimated cost in our 2022 impact fee study was just on November 29th of 2022, so it's very recent, was they estimated about $90,000 an acre. So it's really not a bad deal as whenever you look at cost per acre. And with that being said, there's no other property in the area. Everything is taken up, everything is accounted for. So if we don't act upon it, then we might be behind the power curve and trying to find space to build eventually. We will be behind the power curve. We're trying to find space to build schools in the long term.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes, ma'am?
are you taking questions yet?
Yes, ma'am?
2 quick questions. What kind of schools are you planning on putting on 95 acres? Is it just elementary or K through 8?
Well, we have not made that decision yet. We want to start by actually getting the property. And as you know, with projections and growth, they can take any type of turn. They can slow down because of the economy. It's kind of like, you know, that hurricane cone. We have to look right now at tomorrow, and then eventually, as we look down the road, we want to kind of have this property in our back pocket to assess the situation and assess what we will need long-term. But with having that amount of property, our options are very open to any type of school we would like to put on there.
Okay. Number 2, are there wetlands on this property at all?
There are
Because I know, well, in the past when we built, I know I use Argyle Elementary School as an example, we had to invest quite a lot of money to fill the wetlands in order to build the school.
Yes, ma'am. So there are approximately 21 acres of wetland. The wetlands in the middle of the property, there's about 7.8 acres of wetland in the middle of the property. They are not considered, I don't know the exact term, but they're not considered heavy-duty wetlands. They can be mitigated. The mitigation cost varies on the type of mitigation that does happen. With that being said, we do live in Florida, and it's very hard to find any property in Florida that does not have wetlands on it.
Okay. Last but not least, it sounds actually like you're planning ahead.
We are trying to plan ahead.
Call it planning.
I think that's part of my title is planning. So I'm trying to plan ahead, yes ma'am.
Good answer, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any other questions?
Mine was wetlands as well.
Yes,
No,
ma'am.
in that area.
Wetlands. Yes. And so 21 acres, some of them we probably will not have to mitigate. There is a stream on the southeastern portion of the property that we cannot mitigate on that portion. However, is very, very low in the southeastern portion of the property. Obviously, we're not going to build a school on, you know, it's not a 100-acre school. So we should be able to mitigate what we need to. There is a man-made lake pond in the middle that we'll have to fill in because it was man-made. There's a structure on the property right now. It's about a 4,000 square foot home. However, if you look in the appraisals, that is not the best use of a property. The best use of the property is to build homes. So our choices are, you know, it's a choice that they can put another 300 homes on that property, which they can sell for that purpose, and that'll put us even more behind the power curve if they put 300 more homes on that property.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With 95 acres, I know you don't know what schools will go there, but do you know how many actual schools will fit on there? Like, can you do an elementary and junior high? Can you do, I mean, I don't know, being new to this, as far as land mass,
So
what you're capable of the school.
to put it in perspective, the new St. Johns County School that they just built, Tukoi, it's on about 70 acres. If we take and split the property apart, we probably could put a K-8, or we might be able to put a middle school and an elementary school. We have several options that we can go with that property. It's a beautiful piece of property, it really is. It's a good piece of property. It's not all high and dry, but with that size parcel, it's probably not gonna happen that we're gonna find that much property that is 100% high and dry.
So just to give you an idea, Discovery Oaks is like 66 acres, but only 40-ish acres was buildable. The rest was wetlands, and then the high school, Oak Leaf High School, is actually on 60 acres, but there was less wetlands. They have a little bit more field in the back. But typically for an elementary school, minimum 20 acres, and that's kind of tight. So Spring Park is 20 acres. Talking to our project manager, he's like, yeah, it's a little tight. We don't have any room to grow out there.
But
So
with this is a
20,
lot of,
25, 30 for elementary, a high school for the fields and athletics. We'd like to get 60 to 100.
so, Doc, do we have funds for this?
Yes, we do. It's in our.
I'd just like to ask her.
Yes, it's capital.
We'll know at the end, yes, we do. But we'll know at the end of budget, as we go through the budget. I'm assuming this is paid with LCIF?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Or impact fees. We're in tentative plans right now.
Okay. Yeah.
And I mean, like you said, this is kind of the last parcel available
It
out
really
there.
is.
So worst case scenario, all the development stops and we need to sell the property.
Right.
It's the last piece of property available. I don't think you'll have a hard
Exactly.
time with resale if that were necessary.
And that's a great point, Ms. Gilhousen. It's an investment. If it comes down to where we actually don't need it, we can always sell the property. I don't know if we'll, I'm not a real estate agent, but I do assume that we could probably get our money back if we really needed to. Now,
Never know.
so I would assume that, we can get our money back.
And it's on Russell Road, so
It is.
you've got main thoroughfare
Right,
access,
exactly.
which is very appealing
It
to
is.
if you were to sell it commercial over there.
I talked to the county, and I don't know how the county says this, but they said actually that would actually help them out if we put a school there.
Help
So-
with traffic.
Yeah, exactly. So, because there's so many houses going on Russell Road and the Watkins property, and they want to put 800 homes on that property down there. And those aren't even on the books yet. Those are just kind of what's up in the air. So it's just continuing, and it's going to continue, and it's going to continue, and we're just not going to see any relief in that area.
I just have a question. When I was looking at property we own,
Mhm.
it's very little compared to other counties that their school boards own.
Right. Right.
So we don't even have a piece that we bought that we could sell right now that will not be useful to us?
Well, not really. We don't have a lot of property. We
No,
only
you
have 2
don't.
parcels of property.
That's all you have?
Right, and I don't know if it would be great for us to sell it, if we might want to keep it in our back pocket, just in case. But if it does come down to it, that where maybe one of them we look at that we can sell, that is not out of the question. Right.
And the board in the past has also done land swap.
Right.
So if at one point we feel like there's a parcel that's more appealing than the one we own, there have been developers who've been willing to swap parcels with us, so.
The question comes about, why don't we get developers to grant us the property, or it's not a donation? I want to make that clear that nothing is free, that whenever they give us property per se, they're not really giving us property. We have to give impact fee credits on that property, and that might be 10 years down the road. So we're getting the property at today's price. If I have to give impact fee credits at 10 years down the road, I might be getting credits at double the price of the property. So it's better to get it early than it is to get it late and have to give impact fee credits on that.
And developers always slice out the best piece of property
Yes.
for that. They want to just give us something.
I was just surprised at how little we own.
Right.
Like,
Right.
why we hadn't bought when it wasn't so expensive, maybe, in anticipation.
Exactly, and I'm going to commend the board because this is truly, it's a fiscally responsible decision for planning, not just looking at now, but the future. And this, I think this particular parcel, I mean, it's our job for to give recommendations to the superintendent, recommend to you to put us in the best fiscally responsible, most flexible position we can be in as a district 15 years from now. And if we would, quite frankly, if we would, not to say anything disrespectful to previous boards or leadership, but kicking the can down the road is no longer an option for the boards we deal with, this board, because the growth is on us.
So Dr. Kemp, the person from whom we are purchasing this property, did you say, you know, you want to discount it a little bit for the school district? We could
We
name a
did.
wing after you or?
If you've ever had an opportunity to sit with me in those discussions, you probably don't. My wife won't even go with me to buy a car. Yes, I think that the value of the property is worth more. We're getting it under, we're getting $67,000 per acre when it should be $90,000. I think we've negotiated a letter of intent pending your approval that would put us in the best position. We do have impact fees, LCF dollars set aside for land acquisition. Some impact fees can only be used for growth. $6.5 million, I realize sounds like a lot of money to a lot of people, but I assure you in this market, for us to be able to get a parcel of that size when no longer exists, I'm kind of thankful to the property owner for working with us because he had multiple developments that he could have made more money with.
Well, acreage, I bought my property, way back when was 75,000 an acre.
Yes.
Acreage, even in Middleburg, is very, very expensive, 150, 200 in some spots. It's a good price.
And back to Ms. Skipper, like 100 acres, we always try to shoot for more property than we're going to need for the school, a potential school build. I would like to have, as a former high school principal, and those of us that have done it, I like to have 75, 80 acres for usable acres for high schools. But we always kind of contemplate the mitigation of impervious material anytime, with St. John's River Water Management District is serious, so anytime we put up impervious material, we have to channel that water and create retention ponds and stormwater retention. So we have ways to mitigate it, but we always overshoot the amount of property knowing we have to do that. If we get 70, 80 good usable acres out of that, then you have the flexibility. Well, the next board will have the flexibility to make those decisions on what needs to be built there. We'll have options. And it's because you were proactive.
You said Annabelle Island butts up to this property?
It does. It's just south of, Annabelle is just south of the property.
And then north of the property?
North of the property it's an older, I don't want to say older, it's an established neighborhood.
Okay.
And then right above that is Bradley Creek, the Bradley Creek
So I
neighborhood.
know there's some just independent
There are.
landowner residences.
There are.
And I wondered if maybe it might be worth
So-
acquiring some of that.
So it's funny you say that because a couple of months ago, there is a 40-acre tract that's just south of Annabelle Island. And I went and I tried to talk to the property owner of that, and that 40 acres, on record, they wanted $9 million. So I did not think that was in our best interest at the time, to pay $9 million for 40 acres. As you can see, by Florida statute, we are required to get 2 appraisals. The appraisals have been done. Our price comes in under appraisal, so that's great.
And she since reached back out all of a sudden.
She did, as a matter of fact. The broker reached back out to me about 2 weeks ago. Hey, are you guys still interested? No, we're not interested anymore.
I just wonder if there's a contingent piece of property, for eventually need a junior high and an elementary school on that property to have room to build fields, would there be, or a
We
parking
do
lot?
try to look at that,
Okay.
yeah, and approach those people. But the seller of this property, he did say if we ever do build a school, he wanted to be on the naming committee, so I
Deal.
said, no problem.
That'll be $1 million off the price, right?
That's right. It's going to cost you.
Can you explain where we're at in the process? I assume we've made an offer, we're doing our due diligence, or?
Right, so now I had to put the resolution in for the board to allow me to do the due diligence. Due diligence has been done on the property by a previous potential buyer.
Gotcha.
And I have that due diligence. I've talked to Mr. Bickner. I'm not sure. He's trying to get back to me if we can use that survey and that due diligence on the property. It will save us quite a bit of money. However, it is in that company's name. It's not in the school district's name. So I'm not sure if we can use that, but it would save us a lot of money if we can, and save us a lot of time for that if we can use that due diligence.
Environmentals.
Right.
Yeah, I think you can just go back to that survey here.
Exactly. So hopefully we will be able to use that in some capacity.
Okay, we good?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. All right, so back to the agenda. Change order for Spring Park Elementary School. This is simply to add 16 days. It should be in there any day now. If we're in there, which is fantastic to give us that amount of time to prepare for August. Previous schools opening a little much tighter time frame to get the building open. So I feel really good about the opening time frame.
Mr. Ross,
They're
where are
finishing.
they hiring wise? Have they hired all the positions?
They're in great shape, actually. You know, the challenge when you open a new school is many times teachers want to go with the principal, you know, of their previous school. And so there's this kind of jockeying that exists between 2 or 3 different schools, because as you know, we moved Miss Outman from Lake Asbury Elementary there, but then we also moved Miss Roche from Ridgeview Elementary to Lake Asbury. So that creates ripples as far as people moving in there. So if you looked at, you know, I study all transfers from all schools, because sometimes I'll have people that'll say to me, hey, a lot of people are transferring out of this school. You know, hey, I look at every school, every single transfer, I look at that data. The schools in which there's transfers from are Lake Asbury Elementary, right, going to the new school, Ridgeview Elementary. No other school in the district, hear me well.
Wow.
No other school in the district do I see any pattern of high transfer rate out of that school.
Don't you limit the drainage from Lake Asbury Elementary? Like, so everybody can't go?
Right. Yeah, we suggest to the principal that it's not healthy to move too many people at one time. But that's always a challenge. Because, you know, it's a new building, so everything's shiny, everything's brand new. You know the principal versus whoever the new principal is. I get it. So that's where we are there. Now, the next one is Food Nutrition Services, a proposed meal price increase. Let me just say this. You know, superintendent, I got about 10 different groups of people that you know, I supervise, and one group that I never worry about. Hear me well. Never worry about is Food Nutrition Services, which is, we do a fantastic job there. Susie Glover's behind you there. And I just didn't say that because you were here, Susie. I said that because I mean it. Okay? A fantastic job. Last time we increased prices were the 19-20 school year, and this is a 25-cent increase for breakfast and lunch. She provided you data from, gosh, just about every school district in Florida, what their food prices are. This is totally reasonable considering the increased cost for all of us. We all know that everything is a little bit more expensive, particularly when it comes to food. I would also say what a fantastic job that department did during the time where there was even more supply chain issues. So there's always times where, hey, you can't get this, you can't get that kind of thing. We managed our way through that with 0 interruptions. The number of folks that call me about something of a negative fashion about food and nutrition services in a year is exactly 0. Okay, that's a testament to the people that work in there, because sometimes people can be tough customers, but always, and I'm so appreciative, handles their stuff with professionalism. Any questions or concerns about that? What I love about the agenda item is I love people who put a lot of data into it. So you can see just about every school district and where they're at in relation to food prices. And you can see that ours is in line with or cheaper than most. So I'm proud of that.
Mr. Roski,
Yes, ma'am.
did Ms. Glover bring you breakfast this morning or something? Because you were praising her like hugely. But I have to say.
Thank you for noticing. It's well deserved, so I'm not, I'm not bashful about my praise.
And I have to agree, it is well deserved, because as a teacher, as well as on the school board, it has always been a pleasure to work with food service people, always. So thank you, Ms. Glover.
Thank you. So
so much.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it was something like 5.6 million meals in a year. Just picture what could go wrong for those of you who made dinner at your house. Right? Just picture what could go wrong eating 40,000 people, 5.6 million meals, and very little goes wrong. When it does, it's handled appropriately. Okay, that brings us to the discussion agenda, the strategic plan. We're going to come back to that. I got a presentation on that coming up. And then the last agenda item is public hearing for the student code of conduct. If you recall, previous board meetings, we did the notice to advertise. This would be the public hearing to approve the student code of conduct. Remember, this would be something that we need in place prior to coming back in August. The board can always bring a particular item if it needs to at some point during the year, but we need to start the school year with it in place. Hence the reason why it's on the board agenda for public hearing. So with that in mind, we're going to shift right into the next presentation, which is the strategic plan.
Struggling.
I know, I'm a little bit nervous.
Push the button, give it a second. Then you get it back a little bit.
Okay, let's see what happens.
There we go.
It kind of like goes two at a time, so I see why there's an issue there. Let's talk about the strategic plan. We have a draft for your consideration there. We have a presentation as well as kind of a glossy copy of it that's in front of you that looks like this, that I'm holding up now. This is what potentially it would look like, as in a sort of final fashion. This is the work of Trudy. He does a fantastic job of making the words come to life, on a piece of paper. But just to kind of review where we've been with the strategic plan process.
Oh, no.
This must stick, because you see it went about 12 slides by pressing one button.
Here, we can.
It just wanted me to finish mine really, really quickly.
It may be easier.
Bonnie, why don't you go to the beginning and I'll just give you
That sounds good.
I'll just give you the head nod or the pointing. Because it literally went 10 slides with one button press. I was like, what in the world is this?
It's because it saw so many slides on there.
Wanted to move quicker?
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Skipper, for your encouragement. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the strategic planning process as well as stakeholder input. Some of the slides you'll see will look familiar to you. There'll be others that look brand new towards that, as well as the highlights, our next step, the whole process. It's been a year-long process. Okay, Ms. Honora. Good. Bonnie, go ahead and press the button.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
in there.
All right, let's talk about what a strategic plan, what it's not. Okay, it's kind of a roadmap for the organization. It targets towards specific goals. It should be evidence-based and should be measurable and focused. It's a living document, open to change as the needs arise. What it's not, the big misnomer about a strategic plan, it's not driven by a single goal or set of perspectives. Right? This is a big overall arching vision of goals. It's not reflective of everything that happens in an organization. So if you're going to say, hey, we do this, but it's not in the strategic plan, that's not unusual. We do many more things than are what's in writing in the strategic plan. And it's not a complete overhaul of any organization. It's built on strengths as well. I take the opportunity to remind you that as a district, we're a high-performing district in the top 10 and an A-rated school district. It would seem to me that we should continue to focus on the things we need to focus on in order to have improvement, but we're not starting with zero in mind. There's a lot of good things in place already. If you recall, we surveyed parents at the beginning, so we sent out a survey to all of our parents and said, what are the priorities that you would like to see the school district focus on? Okay, Ms. Honora. Then we got together, we guided our vision, we came up with 5 different goals. If you recall, they look like little blocks on the screen. You remember seeing that one? Okay, Ms. Honora. Then the district gathered input through town halls. Remember the town halls that we had in multiple locations? And at the town halls, we asked, hey, what are we doing well as a district, and what would you like to see us do? So we gathered that data. Then we had a steering committee of folks go on to create aligned strategies and initiatives to help us reach our goals. And then here we are now in June, following broad stakeholder input with a proposed draft as to our strategic plan. Okay, Ms. Honora, there they are, right? The 5 building blocks, if you will. There's no doubt that if you went to any strategic plan across any school district, you're going to have, if you go back one, Ms. Honora, you're going to have student success as one of those goals. That just makes sense, right? Students are the focus, the primary reason that we exist. The second block that you see, talent, recruitment, development, retention, there's no doubt you have to recruit, retain, and develop the people that you hire, especially in a time where some of the folks that you're hiring are not college of ed graduates. There's more capacity building that needs to occur. The district needs to invest in its people, right? If you invest in people and people feel like they're part of an organization, if they feel like they're part of a family, they're going to want to stay within that organization. So it's so important. The third block, family and community engagement, the importance of parents as the primary educator of children is paramount. If you've heard me speak, you've heard me say this 1,000 times because I truly believe it. It requires great people within the school system and leadership of the school system. It requires parents and it requires the community at whole. So that goal is about how do we get all 3 groups involved in our educational system. Next, no doubt, student safety and a positive learning environment, the importance of that. And then we have a duty of fiscal and operational efficiency in that last goal. Okay, Ms. Honora. Now we're going to go on to stakeholder input, so go ahead. Okay, this is where it's like multiple things. So here's all, go ahead and hit it a couple times, Bonnie, so we can get them all up there. One more.
Okay.
There you go. Okay, these are all the different ways in which we've gotten stakeholder input. Okay, so when you take a look at the plan, the draft plan that's put there, you can see we had staff, we had the superintendent's teacher advisory council to get input from teachers directly. We had community town halls at Keystone, Oakleaf, and Fleming Island. 14 different parent groups across Clay County were part of this, the formation of this particular plan. We had board member input, which I'll get to in a minute. Certainly the board weighed in on what their priorities were. And then we had superintendent student advisory council also involved. So when you look at that, I'm very proud of the amount of folks that got together to kind of say, hey, this is the direction that we would like to see for Clay County School, and here's the things that you're doing well as a district. So let's talk about the strategic plan goals and the actual structure of that. So again, Bonnie, go ahead and get down to the bottom of it, because then you do that so that students pay attention in class, right? You do that masking technique. So, okay, never mind. I got distracted. Goal. You have an overarching goal, and then you have metrics involved. You have to be able to measure what it is. Now, not everything fits into a nice, tidy, measurable item, because some of the things we do are not measurable in an affirmative way. But when possible, you want something that's measurable. How else do you know if you've achieved your goal if you don't have a way to measure it? I grew up with 6 brothers, and so if the answer was that we're going to keep score in the game that we're playing, of course we're keeping score, because there's going to be a winner at the end of it, because we're all competitors. Well, the school system's competitive too for children. You have to have a way to measure our success of our goals. Then you have strategies and key activities. So when you look at the actual document itself, you'll notice that's the format of it. Like, what metrics are we going to use to assess whether we're doing well on this particular goal or not? What strategies and then what key activities? Again, is it the all-inclusive list of everything the district does? No. Can it be altered? Of course it can. Okay, does it get looked at every year? It gets looked at every year, brought back to the board as to our yearly progress on the strategic plan. So just a couple highlights that we would kind of point out here. So if you go ahead, I want to go ahead and point out and recognize and thank the board for their input that proved to be valuable in the formation of the plan. You're going to see that. Go on to the next one if you would, Bonnie. Throughout this part of the presentation, you can see our very first one is student success. And you can see that there's really 3 strategies there about a high-quality instructional system, providing evidence-based academic opportunities, and graduate students that are ready to either enroll, enlist, or employ in the workforce. That's not unusual. Just about every strategic plan across the 67 districts are going to have similar wording, because we all want students to be successful when they leave school. That would make sense to me. And thank Kelly for the graphic there. Kelly's the master of the graphic. So here's where you see some of the things, and I kind of highlighted a couple of them related to what board members have expressed related to this. It was Ms. Skipper that talked about increased early literacy. Ms. Hanson also joined in on that conversation about it needs to be a continual focus of early literacy. We've put a great deal of effort into early literacy. We formed a literacy team, a literacy department, if you will. We looked at the programs that are used, switched to more evidence-based reading programs to be in alignment with state statute, and thinking as to the best possible way to educate students when it comes to literacy. The second one is one that Ms. Hanson espoused about many times, which is we got to support teachers in the classroom. That would seem like a common sense initiative that we need to do that. We're looking at also developing demonstration classroom models. We also have a whole teacher support coach model. One of the things that I'll just brag for them, because they won't brag, our group, including Dr. Shepard and others, were down at FASA last week and gave a presentation on teacher support and the program that we have in Clay County. And let me just say, many districts came up and were not only impressed, but were like, hey, how did you do that? How do we have that model of teacher support? Because when you look at it, you can't just take a teacher, hire a teacher, throw them in the classroom and pray that it works out. That would be ill-advised in today's world. Some of the teachers that we hire are great people that care about kids, but then don't have as much experience as they should. So then we have to develop them, and it's not a 1-year deal, it's not a 2-year deal, because remember, well, actually, the state just expanded, you can have a 5-year temporary certificate now, going into it, but there's other requirements that people have to do. So you're helping the individual not only with the classroom activity, with the students, what people think is teaching, but that teacher also has other requirements that they have to complete in order to become a fully certified professional teacher, and helping them with that piece too. Very, very proud of that fact. The third bullet point, increased student engagement. I believe it was Ms. Hanson that talked about engaging students. We heard that. In fact, our whole theme this year coming up is engagement. And engagement means not only engaging students in the classroom, but how do we engage our parents and our community so that they're involved. If it takes all 3 groups for our school system to be successful and be highly effective, then we need to engage parents and get them in, talking about increased volunteerism within our schools and all of those kinds of things. So those are just a couple quick examples in the first goal in which we've taken what we've heard from, 6 different groups of individuals, kind of meshed it together to come forward with a plan. Talent recruitment, right now our teacher retention rate is a little bit over 89, just shy of 90%, which means about 10%, a little bit more than 10% of teachers leave during a school year. Okay, that's not unusual. In fact, it's way above the state average for that. In general, teachers are not leaving, and I know Ms. Kidwell's not going to want to hear me say this, but the data supports it, and I talk about the data, not anything emotional related to this topic. They're not leaving the profession in droves. That's not simply not happening. The data supports the idea that we're actually hiring less teachers this year than we did in the previous year. I would like to think, although I don't have any proof, I'd like to think it's because we attempt to support our teachers. Do we get it perfectly all the time? Of course not. Of course not. But it's a goal, and certainly we focus on that. Okay, and of course this is my wheelhouse, and one of my first loves is retaining folks within the system. I know I've heard Ms. Hanson speak about additional pay for veteran teachers, and that's certainly something that when we get into that portion, that time of the year, we want to do that, and I don't think we've ever gone into that not wanting to compensate our employees to the greatest extent possible based on our fiscal situation. This year will be no different when it comes to that. Okay, Ms. Laura. This is one that Ms. Bola had brought forward about provide experienced and novice teachers continued training to develop the pedagogical skills and opportunities to learn by examples. You can see there we have Project Prep, which is the largest grant that UNF has ever had, and we have a great partnership with them and creating a pipeline for students to become teachers within our system, and also developing demonstration classrooms so people can actually see that done in action in real time. Next, we're talking about family and community engagement. I know that Ms. Skipper had a lot of thoughts related to parental involvement, a lot of thoughts related to how do we get our community engaged. One part of our engagement plan this year that we've already pushed out to administrators during summer leadership is engaging parents in a positive way to come back into schools through parental volunteerism in our schools. These items deal with a variety of topics. The first strategy is talking about how do we engage our community, and just a couple quick examples of the type of things that we're looking to do. The Garber Academy would be one example, creating a pipeline for students to start off in $60,000 a year job, leaving Middleburg High School to go work within the industry. Our Fire Academy is another example of that. We have to create workforce development opportunities where students see how to leave school and then where to go from there. Now, I didn't have any problem because my dad would have just kicked me out and said, go figure it out, here you go, right? But when you get to the end of school, you should be prepared for life ahead. And these are great opportunities. Our internship with Clay County Utility is another example. Students leave that internship with a better than $60,000 a year starting job for a high school student coming out of there. So we'll continue to work on those community partnerships. The second strategy, of course, we're dealing with volunteers, and we look to expand parental and community volunteers within our school. I think we have pockets of greatness across the district, and I think you experienced that at Fleming Island Elementary. But we also have others that are going to require some more volunteerism. And then, of course, being good communication strategy 3, if that's not on every school district's, they're just missing the boat. Because no matter how good you communicate, there's still more communication that can be done. And then the next one, I think this was more Ms. Skipper's one where she was bringing forward a variety of ideas related to parental involvement in what we should do in schools, making it easier for parents to enroll, making it easier for parents to be involved. We're looking to establish a superintendent's parent advisory council to meet with parents from every school quarterly. So you can kind of see the theme there is more community involvement and engagement within our school system. It'll be good for those parents and their families, and also be good for the school system itself to have folks involved, more involved in our system. The next, it talks about safe and positive learning environments. There's no doubt student safety is job one, and you can see the items there: enhanced student mental health and wellness. Students' mental health is a thing. It's a real thing. We see that happen with our students across many different genres. You can see the second one is positive behavior supports, as well as, heck, you have to discipline students. I know that doesn't sound very popular, but I come from a very strict, family, and there was no nonsense about it. And I think number two kind of echoes of that, but also the positive nature. You should make school kind of place where people want to go. How about that? You want to go to school. And then the third one is to obtain police department accreditation. I believe that was Ms. Clark's thought process there. Then the last part there, the accreditation, and then addressing student discipline. I think Ms. Clark and Ms. Hanson both had comments related to that. Disciplining students and making sure that students are in fact properly disciplined. And then the last one deals with fiscal and operational efficiency. I think that strategy 2 is something that I heard Ms. Hanson talk about, because financial transparency and communication, the way the website was organized, I believe, was the conversation that was brought forward, as well as enhancing our technology and our infrastructure. Oh, the next one, you're going to like this one. Go ahead, Miss. We're going to decrease portables. I'm not sure who said that, but we did have a board member that talked about decreasing portables at one meeting, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, or every meeting. So just a reminder, no portables Discovery Oaks, no portables Spring Park Elementary. You signed the removal of portables I think it was last board meeting. You don't.
Very happily too.
Elementary, yeah, we get it, and at the same time, we try to balance our fiscal ability to do so and to create more permanent space across the district, and that's balanced with many, different items, and so there's a portable reduction plan in the works there. So the next steps, Bonnie, let's go on, go one more. Keep going. Okay, so then next steps, we're going to bring this item. I know that we gave you the draft copy of the document there, but departments will begin to create long-range plans to tackle some of those strategies and key initiatives that are embedded within the plan. We'll partner with key stakeholders to implement the best possible plans to make this reality. You should look at some of the metrics, because we didn't chimp out at the metrics. Like I think we said a 94% retention rate of teachers. That would put us #1 in the state in teacher retention. So when you look at the goals, they're ambitious and lofty. They're not like, low range kind of things, because we feel like we should push ourselves in a positive direction in many avenues. Then you see the data and feedback portion of that, and then we publish an annual report each year, like how did we do on this each year. And then there's the opportunity to add and subtract as time goes on. A 5-year plan, a lot of things can change, right? Like in 2019, did you really think 2020 would be 2020? No. Right, so keep in mind, when you're looking at this plan, it's 23 to 28, hopefully there's nothing of that nature that occurs in that time frame, but we have the ability to adjust if something does happen. So that is it when it comes to the strategic plan. Any questions? It was dazzling, I know, thank you. Thank you. All right, so then the next item on the agenda for today is book reviews. And do you have a presentation there by Mr. Daly, as well as board member discussions related to this particular topic? Let me just say, without a doubt, Mr. Daly has done a great job in relation to this particular topic. It's one of those times, I called him this morning, and I guess I was like the coach right before the player goes into the game and said, hey, you feel like you're ready for this presentation? He said, unequivocally, yes.
Well, this is all I've lived in for 18 months. The presentation is for you. I know it by heart. Well, good morning. So some of the initial part of the presentation is a bit of a more succinct review of what we've talked about previously. We've mentioned many times now for the last 18 months that just this thing sort of came to light, that this is an emotional topic for people and there's opinions all over the place. So to protect the district rather than engage in subjectivity or opinion, we follow the letter of the law. Now, as you're going to see in this presentation, sometimes our lawmakers fall short in bringing forward language to clarify things for us to go forward. So I want to make sure that the district is impervious to sort of litigation on this matter, because we're seeing that occur elsewhere in the state and across the nation, and historically this has been a topic around First Amendment rights, and sometimes those get murky when you get into the schoolhouse, because typically the laws don't disaggregate from, let's say, people of majority age in society at large versus in the schoolhouse specifically for children of minor age. So we follow the letter of the law, and what I would call a strict construction of the law, a literal interpretation of the law. As you're going to see, the law often doesn't quantify. It will qualify to some degree, but it won't quantify. And I'll give you some examples of what that is and what that means as we go through it. So, Mrs. Honora, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So this background you've seen before, but for the benefit of everybody to get on the same page, because you're dealing with a number of topics simultaneously today. We've always had challenges. That is nothing new. There are challenges going back as far as this district has been around. But typically they've been very few. Recent events sort of nationally have brought this into the limelight again, and we have some people in our community that are particularly passionate about this. And so as you'll see in the 3rd district, 94% of the 488 challenges have been from a single complainant. And so this is really, I kind of wanted to put that into context. Districts across the state are dealing with the same thing, and most of the districts have similar collections. You'll find the same types of books on the shelves for the same age groups as you might imagine, because they're purchasing from the same vendors. So it really, what varies is the size of the collection, and that's usually relative to the size of the district. So for example, Duval, which is a much larger district, has a much larger array of titles available for their students and so on. Mr. Norm? So right now we've seen 488 correctly completed challenges. We've received in excess of 500 total, but some of those were not completed, so we weren't able to process them. But we've processed 488. 76 of the district's 183,000 plus titles have been removed. So that's a very small fraction. I don't even know how to read that fraction, to be honest with you. I wasn't a math major, but I think if you multiply that times 100, you'll get a percentage of what that is. But if you had told me, in fairness, a year and a half ago that we'd have 76 titles that were worthy of removal, and I imagine that number will grow a little bit, I would have said, no, how could that be? But we've addressed that before. We've acknowledged it. I think we're the first in the state to acknowledge the issue and to take action on it and work transparently with our community to make sure that we're addressing the issue. You'll notice that the number 183,638 is smaller than the last number, and that's because the state is now requiring the weeding of the collection. That process has begun. I imagine that number will continue to go down. So right now we have 132 titles subject for review. We've been trying to get those scheduled for the coming year. We are not doing reviews in the middle of the summertime because of the availability of people relative to the summer holidays. But when we get cranking back up in August, we have those already slated for the coming school year. I think we have the capacity to do it in excess of 200 currently. Bear in mind, this is our team, right, 3 people right here. So the total number of titles available for our students to check out are 183,506, so a pretty robust collection of titles. The circulation is an issue I want to point to. While the elementary circulation of books, that's the rate of checkouts, is very high, for secondary, it diminishes tremendously, particularly once you get to high school, to where, virtually kids aren't reading. My own children, who are good students academically, have never checked out a book from their high school. That's not because they don't read, it's because they consume their literature in different formats, most of it digitally, on their devices and so on. I'd say that's true of most students. And so the library, for those age groups, is really sort of a place to print stuff on the computer. And I don't know that my own sons know where the library is in their school, but they're good readers. It's just that generation has shifted a little bit. I think once the introduction of devices occurs, whether those are tablets or phones or whatever, the shift goes away from checking out the book in the library itself. So that consumption looks different. So the circulation rates there are very, very low. I think that's probably in conjunction with the fact that we're also competing with technology, Xbox and social media and all the things that kids today have that, let's say, I didn't have when I was growing up and would have been more likely to check out a book. So when we're going through these examples, we always run on every challenge title the circulation rates. I will tell you that not one of them, out of the 480 something, not one had a high circulation rate. They were all very low. Once in 10 years, twice in 10 years, 5 times the first year, nothing after that, that kind of thing. We looked at putting at first what the public libraries do is a 3-year reading. If we did a 3-year reading, we wouldn't have anything left in our collection. I'm just going to tell you, they'd be empty shelves. We looked at a 5-year reading. We'd decimate the library collections at the high school level. A 10-year reading is probably what we're going to go forward with, and that's still going to put a huge dent in the number of books available because kids aren't checking the books out, right? That's just the reality of it. I know that people of a certain vintage in here lament that, but that's just the way it is. And we'll see that return. If we go to the, was that a nice way to say that?
Mr. Daly, I think it's important to point out that in elementary school, oftentimes library is one of the classes that kids take.
Okay.
So it's a resource. So it's art, music, PE, and they go to the library usually once a week at least.
Much more
with
active.
their teacher.
Much more active, yeah.
And they're encouraged or told to check out a book or two. So I think there's also a difference where, especially when we talk about what we offer in our libraries, obviously it needs to be age appropriate. But in the elementary levels, we are encouraging students to check out books constantly, where once they get to junior high and high school, if a student visits the library, they're doing it on their own volition and perusing the books at their own recreation. It's not a teacher or anybody instructing them to do so.
I think that's a good point. I think it's also a good point that as kids get older, they realize which things are optional in their life and push back a little bit. And that was true in my own house where, my boys weren't given phones or Xbox or that type of thing until the junior high age. And so my 2 older sons were they were the AR champions when that was still a thing for their whole school, both of them twice. They read a lot. We read constantly. They read entire series, consumed as many books at the Battle of the Books, all those kind of cool things. And then the moment that, and I don't know if we did right, or they're straight A students, they're doing well, so I think we've done well. But it's hard, hindsight's 20/20, but we had that conversation in our house about, all right, now they're on a bus going somewhere further. Do we need to be able to be in contact with them? Here's the phone, and then sayonara, adios means goodbye, and to the library, and they never went back. And so I'm glad we did that early foundation and really inundated my children with exposure to literacy, because now they're still exposed. They're taking tons of classes and that type of thing, but they're consuming classwork. I would also point out that academically, the requirements, time-wise, for a secondary student are far greater than what you see for elementary. Typically, they have more homework more often. It bogs them down, and so less time to interface
I can
with that
speak
stuff.
as a I love to read, but when I was in school from junior high through college, recreational reading didn't happen as much because my time was consumed with the readings that were mandatory.
Yeah, that's reflected in the circulation rates at secondary, by the way, that where you'll see, let's say, resource books, encyclopedias, things of that nature. Well, even encyclopedias, right, you can reference that on your device. So like that type of information that you and I would have gone to the library for as a student to access, now is literally they can pull it up on their phone. They can pull everything up on their phone, which is convenient, but it sort of reframes the way we have to think about how secondary students interface with library media services going forward. I think that's another conversation we need to have at another time. That would be a tangential conversation right now, but it's something to put on like the back burner to consider what do we do relative to that going forward. So here are some of the things we've done today. We've done a number of things, but these are some highlights. Is we have developed new additional procedures with multiple layers of scrutiny relative to future purchasing. Bear in mind, historically, there was no oversight to purchasing. None. It was the one area where people could purchase whatever. I think I've said here before, when I was a principal, I had to get approval from the district to buy like a monitor for the library. Literally, that occurred. I had it was a boondoggle to get that done. But they were able to purchase whatever they want, whenever they want, sort of innocuously, and that's part of what led to here. Going forward, there will be media center, the media specialist will attest that these things, that they've looked at them and that these purchases meet the statute. The principal, who's named in statute, will then have to do the same thing, and then it will come to the district for a third layer of eyes to be put on that. We'll talk about purchasing a little bit more later, but those will be 3 steps involved that have never been involved before to help us make better decisions around what we're bringing into the collections going forward. The state has also brought forward some guidelines about how they'd like to see future purchasing occur, which has been helpful. On the second bullet there, we've brought together people that have the most diverse views of this possible, put them into a room together and sat them down, and honestly, they would have been a model for our legislators because they sat down, people that really don't have a lot in common other than they like kids and they live in Clay County, very political, different viewpoints politically, culturally, that type of thing. And we had really productive conversations where they were able to suggest together guidelines for future purchasing. Interestingly enough, I'd kind of sketched out my own guidelines that I thought might be appropriate should they be unable to make progress, and what they came up with was exactly, almost verbatim, what I had penciled in myself. And so I think those are some things where we've heard from our community that could help guide us on this issue as well. And then this third bullet to me is the most important, because what I'm going to present to you in a moment is the opportunity for us to put this completely, totally, utterly in the hands of parents in terms of what is or is not checked out, when, why, all of those types of things, so that no child could have access to a book that a parent wouldn't want them to have access to, and that would be in the hands of parents, and that would be the ultimate layer of protection. Now, we can't guarantee contraband, like one kid checks out a book, it's like, hey, check out my book, that kind of thing, that goes on in schools with everything. But the parents would be able to know, hey, my child is allowed, not allowed, or yeah, they're allowed, but I want to have eyes on it when they do. Mrs. Honora, if you could go to the next slide, please. And so these are the options that are currently available, and I was speaking to Mrs. Hanson the other day, and she said she'd like to see this more on the front burner. I agree with her. I think that this needs to be marketed more clearly. And we are talking about currently in this situation, a parent can opt out, but might it make more sense to have them have to opt in? Now, I know that the conversation among the elementary folks is that could be very, very problematic because of what we were talking about a minute ago, the high levels of usage. So maybe we could do it in a way where elementary remains status quo, because I will tell you about 99%, I think that's the real number, of the books that are problematic for us are secondary, not elementary. So really the focus of our conversation needs to be on secondary. So could we remain status quo for elementary, but for secondary, perhaps where the parent would have to send in the form, just like they do with the nursing stuff, to say, hey, I give my child permission to check out books. I trust you guys. That would be one option. Hey, they can check it out, but I want to get an email sent to me on that day, the moment they check it out, telling me what they checked out so I can monitor it myself and do some parenting. Or 3, I don't want them to check out anything, we'll cover it. If we need to check out a book, we'll go to the public library. And so that would be the most flexible, the easiest, and give total control to the parents and give total protection to parents who are concerned about their child accessing books that they might not find appropriate for their child. And so I think that would be the way forward. We just need to cement how that would work by working with Mrs. Tito and her group about what that would look like for elementary. But at the very least, we remain right here. So, this is in the hands of parents in Clay County schools. Ms. Honor? And so we're going to look right now at just sort of the procedure overview and how this works. Step 1, we receive a complaint that goes to Mrs. Gannon in the district library media's specialist area, and then within 7 days, Dr. Johnson would notify the Challenge Oversight Committee, and those initials are the Chief Academic Officer, the Supervisor of Instructional Materials, and the District Library Media Specialist. That's the 3 of us, and that's sort of step 1 under the new policy. And we take a look. We look at those, and we have the option to do one of the 3 following. Immediate and permanent removal if there's an obvious statutory violation. We can return and say there's obviously nothing here, or somehow the complaint is incomplete or something like that. Or we can refer it to a 5-person council if we deem that necessary. In other words, it walks right up to the line of being a violation, but we don't have the language to clarify that. And there we're seeking additional eyes to be put on that. I'm going to give you some examples of what those look like. Because let's put this into sort of perspective. In the past calendar year, you've gotten complaints from 4 individuals. I'm one of those authors. But from the school year on, let's say from like last August, September on, only from 1 individual. And these complaints vary from things that are obviously egregious violations to things that are, I can't discern what is the issue that the complainant takes with the book, other than they don't like the content or something. And so we do a strict interpretation of the applicable statutes to guide us, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I'm going to keep reiterating this because I think it's the pertinent point. To protect the district and to remain consistent, we stick to the language of the law, period. This is on the lawmakers. And I think we'll see in this presentation as we go forward, most of us in here would like the lawmakers to come forward with more specific language. That was proposed in the last legislative session, and then that died in subcommittee and did not come forward for whatever reasons. It would have been very helpful, though, to help us continue to define, because some of this stuff is very granular and very specific, and others are wildly subjective. And those gray areas there are impossible for us to navigate without lawmakers bringing forward clarity to those issues. So our recent policy here authorizes the designee, typically me, to remove materials that fail to meet the statutory requirements. As we mentioned earlier, there have been 76 of those so far. But then House Bill 1069, which came out after the board brought forward the policy, echoes the exact same thing, and that's the language, my italics there for emphasis. It's not that you can discontinue its use, you shall discontinue its use, and that's an immediate and effective removal of materials that violate the statute. So I give full credit to the board for being abreast of the changes that were happening in Tallahassee. You guys predicted those exactly right, and what you brought forward in the policy is almost exactly what the state brought forward in the legislative session. So that made things very smooth and very easy for us. So I appreciate the board's leadership on that issue. And so the decisions to retain or remove challenge materials have been made consistently. Where we've seen other districts get into trouble is that they've gone off in motion. They'll look at a book and they'll, oh my God, that book's got to come out. I've had the same reactions. But to act on emotion rather than law opens up the districts to litigation. And so we envelop ourselves in sort of a bulletproof vest, which is the language of the statute itself. So we examine, this is the steps so everybody knows what occurs when we look at these. We examine the evidence provided by the complainant. So whatever evidence is on the complaint form, that's what we're looking at. We're not looking at other things because we wouldn't know what to look for. So we look at that and we literally go line by line, literally like set it on the desk, look at what has been put on the complaint form, get the law out next to it and go with a highlighter back and forth to see. And so this is a very time-consuming process. I can't imagine having to do it with a 300-page book, just doing it with the short complaint form alone. We have spent endless hours on this. I would say in the course of doing our regular jobs for which we were contracted, we're probably doing 25 hours a week on this in addition to that, literally every week. And so it takes a long time, and sometimes the complainant will send emails and say, why hasn't this been done? Well, we have actually another job to do, and we're doing this also, and we have to have calibrating discussions to get this right, because we want to protect the district, and it's important. I think that the removal of literature from a collection is a serious, sober matter, and so it requires great thought. We're not just trying to get this done and check a box, so it does take some time. It's important to note that the applicable statutes do not quantify how much of something is allowable. So let me give you a couple of examples. There are books going back onto the shelf that have profanity in them. I would not choose them for my children. I would not personally read them. If I were a principal, I would not procure them for my collection. Profanity is protected speech, however. There's no law in the state of Florida that outlaws it or prohibits it. And so, not given that law, because remember, the laws don't specifically apply to school. Perhaps there should be one that applies to people of minor age or something like that. But Chapter 847 is a very, very, very old statute. There was a case in 1965 about Florida trying to ban profanity and things like that didn't even make it out of the first round of appeals. So on something like that, let's say there's something like that, or you say, well, that's inappropriate. Inappropriate is the guiding language. Or maybe drug use. There's a reference to drug use, or there's someone in the novel using drugs. How many? Because one argument is, well, there's 300 pages and there's only drug use on page 31. The law doesn't say there can be up to 5 or 3 or 10 of these. It says that the presence of it makes it unallowable. Its simple presence triggers it to come out. So until the law comes forward and says you can have up to 2 or 5 or 10 or 15, so there's a qualifying statement. We don't want something inappropriate, but nothing to quantify. And I want you to think about, they say things like inappropriate. What does that mean? To you it means one thing, to me it means another, to everyone in the room it's different. So we need clarifying language on that because the value systems of our stakeholders very wildly consider the various communities that our school system serves. So what's allowable in your house and what's allowable in another house can be starkly different. On the third bullet, it's easy to conflate the statutes, to get them confused. One statute does not have bearing on another. They don't lean on each other. So people are getting these confused, so they'll say something like, if they're not allowed to talk about this particular topic, and then if you look in House Bill 7, there's 5 or 6 different things that are a no-no in the classroom right now to a captive audience. There are some things that people even get that wrong on, so, issues around some hot topics politically, I won't name them right now, but those types of things, and they'll say, you can't teach that in the classroom. The actual language of the statute says you can teach those in a classroom if part of a broader discussion, given context, posited or juxtaposed next to other things. You can't advance it as a standard or doctrine. So there's confusion just on that. But then people take it further and say, well, you can't have it in the library either. Yeah, you can, because that's self-selection. Look at what the word, but there's self-selection. A person chooses that of their own volition. So that is not illegal. It's not banned at all. So some things aren't allowed to be taught as doctrine, but are allowable on the library shelf for personal selection. This is Nora. So this is the procedure for the final decision. I'm going to bring some clarity for the board here. We adopted this in April. The challenges which have been decided shall be placed on the consent agenda as a single item. You can pull one if you want to look at it individually for discussion. What you're doing is you're working in the same way that an appellate court would work. So in an appellate court, if there was a case to go to appeals, that court wouldn't go back and interview all the police officers and the people who were arrested and the witnesses and all that. What they're doing is looking at the constitutionality, the application of the law itself, and seeing did the court beneath it do a good job. So the assumption here is that the three of us have been consistent and followed the standard and that type of thing. And remember, you're only ruling on what is in the complaint form itself. If there's additional things in, let's say there's book X, and in the complaint form, there's nothing that violates a statute, but there's something else in that book that does, that we're unaware of. Should that come forward later and that evidence be produced at a later time, remember I just showed you the statute that effective July 1 next week, the school district shall discontinue its use. You would just revisit and address it. The same way you would address something like employee discipline or something like that. You're not responsible to know what's on every page. You're responsible to address it when it comes to your attention, or in your case, to make sure that I do that on your behalf. So I think that you guys might take a deep breath that you don't have to read all of these books. If you've looked at 171 appeals, that probably wore you out, and that was just on a one-pager, right? You can imagine the volume of that. You don't have 30 hours a week to spend on that, nor are you required to do that. Mrs. O'Nora? So the appeals procedure itself works like this. It occurs simultaneously with the board notification. Dr. Johnson, do you have that graphic? Do you have one for the board members? She's going to hand you something that's a visual that will help you. It's a graphic representation. I couldn't load it because it was horizontal rather than vertical, or vertical rather than horizontal, so we gave you a paper copy to look, but it's basically this, just in a visual. Within 10 days of notification, the complainant may file a one-page request for appeal. You have seen those appeals. I will note that of the 171, that number is down to like, I think 160, 162, because I went and overruled some of the committees. I want to explain that to the room. Prior to the policy change in April, prior to the policy change, those things would go to a full committee right away. The committees, understandably, remember these were volunteers from our community, are not living and breathing the statutory language each and every day like I am. So they understandably didn't grasp all of the nuances of it. And so there were cases where I listened to their conversations, they were healthy, productive conversations, they ruled to put some of these books back on the shelf. Now that we're to the point where both the board and the state are putting us in a position where, hey, if we have this, we have to take it out if it violates the statute, I overruled those because there were blatant violations of the statute. I thank those committees for their work because they had to read that book and come off work and sit down and do that, and it was important work. But we can't knowingly put those books back onto the shelf. I think it would put us in violation of the law. So that number is reduced. Bear in mind, you'll never have like 171 of these again because there was a backlog of these because this is the first time we've got to the appellate process. Going forward, the number will be much smaller, much more manageable for the board members to deal with. On bullet 2, within 10 days of notification, the complainant may file a one-page request for appeal with the superintendent's office, and the superintendent's office notifies them of the meeting date. So here's the timeline. Within 15 days before the board meeting, the complainant may serve the superintendent with position statements for the appealed titles. Our complainant has made it clear that they plan to challenge each and every one of those, so you can expect them for all of those. No later than 10 days before the board meeting, the superintendent's designee may serve the complainant with a written position statement. I did not do those for any of these because I have no rebuttal. I'm not fighting for these books or not fighting for these books. I'm simply ruling on what the law said, and I did that in round 1. I don't really, that's in there if I need it, if I want it. I'm not choosing to avail myself of that particular option right now because we ruled on it in the first time. And if you look into the appeals papers, a lot of the times the complainant came back and said, hey, this violates the statute. Well, if it had violated the statute, we would have taken it out the first time. There has to be some kind of forthcoming of evidence or new evidence or something like that to help us clarify that it does not meet the statute as the complainant suggests. So no later than 7 days before the board meeting, statement copies will be provided. You guys had those well in advance of the 7 days. And if you wish to look at a specific title, you certainly may do so. And so the final decision, to me, isn't all that final, because it's final in the sense that we're ruling on it, we're moving on, but again, should evidence from that material come forward that was a violation, then we would take it out. I don't think that would need to come to you again, because if that violation came out, then we would remove it. If it came back out again and challenged with something else that didn't, I'm just sending it back to the complainant. So both of those options are on. I don't see it bogging you down a second time, ever. So board members may discuss the merits of the written statements, the actions of the committee and the district curriculum council, if applicable, and the decision of the superintendent's designee with regard to the challenge book, after which they shall, without any further involvement or statements from either from me or the complainant, make a final decision. So once it's up to you, I'm not speaking about it anymore. The complainant is not allowed to speak anymore. It's just among you to look at and make a decision. So a board may overrule or approve the decision of the superintendent's designee, and then at that point we move on. And I recognize that you guys have felt some weight about this. I have done my very best job to make sure that it has been done correctly to protect you guys. And I feel super, super confident that we've done an excellent job in that regard. And at this time, I think that really concludes my portion of this. You may have questions, comments, or concerns. My advice, if you want to take it, is to follow the language of the law. If you follow the law, you can't go wrong. And if you don't like some of these books and some of the material, I certainly don't, then it's up to our lawmakers to bring forward clarity on that. I feel like if we try to do that, certainly I'm not going to do that. I feel like that exposes us to issues, because our opinions, like everyone's, are subjective, and our stakeholders may disagree. I will tell you that in regard to future purchasing, it's a very different ballgame. So let me explain that just for the benefit of the group. For future purchasing, the state has brought forward guidelines about future purchasing. We've listened to our community members whose suggestions around this are a little more granular, but in essence aligned with the state, that we need to be more discriminating. We haven't been discriminating in the past, which is why we're here. But remember, if you're going to buy books, you have to be discriminating anyway. There's an infinite number of materials we could purchase. We have a limited budget by which to purchase. And so going through this three-part process that I outlined in the beginning would allow us to make sure that we don't bring anything into the collection that is going to be problematic or inappropriate going forward. In reaction to the stuff that's already in the challenge, there's nothing that the state has brought forward to retroactively address something that you've already onboarded and made available, unless it violates the statute. There's a lot of things that the state came forward in their guidelines, like in their state training, that were super subjective. For example, on slide 11 of the library media specialist training, it says that in regards to future purchasing, we should err on the side of caution, but it doesn't define what that would mean. And I would imagine that would mean for different people, different things. I don't have to imagine that, I know it, because I've already heard from people on that. So for some people said, oh, we should have everything in the book, and other people said, we should have none of it in the book, and that wide range of opinions in between. So again, I think that type of language, age appropriateness, err on the side of caution, those things are so subjective that it puts us in very murky waters. And for those, I think that we need to again, follow the specific language outlined in the laws of the state of Florida, and if we do that, we'll be in good shape. So that's my spiel.
I have a question. So essentially moving forward, when we do go to purchasing, we should just create a policy as a board so that this doesn't happen again, or this inappropriate material is never purchased again.
Well, the state outlines what those things should look like, right? And
So take what the state has given us and put it in a policy?
Well, I would take that, and I would take maybe the guidelines from our community members, and then you've got a three-part process that we have to follow. I don't know if that's policy or procedure. I'm not well versed enough on that to know which would be best. But certainly, like the scrutiny from our office is going to be extreme. In fact, our conversations continue that. I'm not worried about elementary at all, not even remotely. That's very easy. Secondary, particularly high school, I'm very concerned about that, how to make that process perfect. I don't know. I have concerns about opening up purchasing for high school. I truly do. And you know, the amount of, how are we expected to look at every single page of every single book that's being asked? We don't have the capacity to do that.
And just from a fiscally responsible position, the readership and circulation of those books to pour thousands of dollars into acquiring more when the ones we have aren't being used.
It's a good question, right? So now that could be, like, at first blush, that could be unpopular. You're not gonna buy books for kids. But should that money be sort of reallocated for maybe technology or the other ways that kids are interfacing with literature or whatever they're consuming in terms of reading? I think those are questions that need to be asked. I share your concern about, are we going to buy more books to sit on the shelves, whether they're good books or bad books? I'd almost like to have a problem where kids say, "Ooh, I read this in a book," and you know, and then we had to deal with it. You know how many times that's occurred? Zero, right? Because they're not reading. So all of this is about books that kids aren't reading anyway. But I think, to your point, is I think we need to look at purchasing for high school. I think, could we take that money and spend it in a better way, in a more effective way, rather than buy things with taxpayer money that people are not using?
Right, I would rather put that money in the classroom. I would rather support teachers who have prescripted use for literature and instruction, and they need resources for their classroom. Rather than having one class set of the novel that they're covering that semester, why not have a book for every child that they can take home and they can annotate in it and use? You know what I'm saying?
I do, yeah.
You can spend that money on literature, on real paper books, in a way that's more constructive and better use.
I agree. I think that's a discussion the superintendent and I and some of the others will have to have going forward, because you can imagine that it's not going to resonate with our high school media specialists, right?
Sure.
Right? But at the same time, and the larger view is I think we do need to reconsider
Well,
what
but
we
to
do.
your point, if we are going to do a 10-year lead out, then maybe we also do a 10-year refresh.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if we're not leading out for 10 years, then it's the same number of books. We're not getting rid of any. And then as you let go of titles, then you can look at the possibility of adopting.
Still have 183,000 books,
Correct.
right? I mean, yeah, yes, Mrs. Bowl.
Sorry, I was, on your comment, Ms. Gilhouse, the other thing that we would want to do, particularly in the high schools, is view the programs that each of the individual high schools are doing. For instance, we had a number of students who spoke to us from the IB program at Ridgefield. We had other students talk to us about ACE requirements. But then again, we also have technology requirements for some of our CTE programs. So making a blanket statement for secondary obviously won't be the best. And to Ms. Skipper's point about a policy at this stage, I would be hesitant to jump into a policy, and here again, leave it up to Mr. Brodsky in the superintendent's office to bring the policy to the board ultimately. Just a thought.
I agree, and I think, just as we're looking for supporting those, like I said, individual teachers in the classrooms, that includes obviously the programs like CTE and IB. So I don't think that we necessarily need to continue a purchasing freeze, but the purchasing that we put in place would be for specific teacher-guided resources rather than just media center books.
And I think in the agenda attached to it is the script from the state's library media training module, which we waited for 6 months because it was supposed to be this great illumination of how to go forward. And all it did was say what they had already said last July, and it said basically follow the statute. And then they give some suggestions, some handy-dandy suggestions that all contradict one another. And like if you look on slide 8, it says to do this. On slide 11, it says to do something exactly the opposite. And it's sort of circular. It just keeps coming back to follow the statute, but hey, use some common sense, but then they don't define what common sense is. And so we're left to figure that out, and that's what's gotten other districts into hot water. So I do really, I'm hopeful that our lawmakers will revisit the language that they looked at this past spring next year, which they're gonna have to do something to help make this more manageable for us at this level. Any other questions?
I just, for a point of clarity, when the board votes on this item, the vote that the board is taking would be, and I just wrote it down so I would have clarity of how, in my mind, what we're approving, that the district committee's process and decision is in alignment with Florida statute and with the Clay County School Board policy.
That is correct.
That's what we're voting on.
Yes, you're not voting to say that you read all the books and
Correct.
you're
You're
in
not approving an individual book
No.
or 173
No,
books.
no, you're-
You're voting to decide whether the curriculum review committee followed Florida statute and school board policy.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct. So, anything else? Okay, well, I appreciate your attention on it. Thank you.
Ms. Gilhousen, can I address the board for a
Of
few
course,
minutes?
yes, Ms. Hanson.
Ms. Klein, one of these please. So on our next school board meeting, it is our responsibility to approve or bring books to discussion. And we have never done this before, and this is a lot of books. And so there's a couple of things that I want to talk about, because I'm going to push back a little bit. If you guys would go, this is the library media training. I gave it to you so you could look at it before or if I bring books to discussion at the board meeting. I wanted you to see what the state of Florida thinks. It is true there are a lot of different laws. They could conflate with each other, but in this document it does separate those laws for us to try to understand them better. If you look at slide 6, library materials on a reading list must meet several statutory requirements. Here and on the next few slides, they're going to discuss it. Materials must be. And by the way, we just spent 2 hours and 20 minutes hearing about all the exceptional things our county does. I was more than happy to see the strategic plan written the way it was and hear compliments from the teacher leadership training. So if I'm talking right now, please don't take this as a personal insult for anybody. We sat 2 hours and 20 minutes with a few questions and relatively we're pleased with what we heard, right? You do a great job, but it doesn't mean that everything is a great job and that it can't be improved upon. And I don't know why I have to explain myself because we're all adults who can have conversations. But number 1, free of pornography and all materials prohibited are not prohibited in a school library media center. That's easy. Mr. Daly's right, in the statute, it does list like A through M of what pornography would be. And you can go through and say, oh gosh, nope, 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 oh that picture, nope, right? As a county, and in general, every school board in the United States at this point in time has a dilemma. Because as a community, if we are waiting for specific definitions from legislators, we could be waiting until the day we die. They are never going to tell a county exactly what to do with their students. Every county is different in the country. So we are, as a county, we do a really bang-up job on number 1, free of pornography of all materials. And I have been led to believe that if we talk about 2, which is materials must be suited to student needs and their ability to comprehend, we will get into lawsuits. If we want to write a policy to help explain our community standards and give us some guidelines as we're voting on this, it should include number 3, materials must be appropriate for grade level or age group. So a lot of things have gone right in this process. I read all 171 challenges more than one time. That's what you do when you can't do anything else, you just read challenges. And I have one hand, so I apologize. So there was many books, 95%, maybe more, 98% of the books on that challenge list should never have been pulled off the shelf. It's true. Books like Before She Was Harriet should have never been pulled off the shelf. And luckily, when we streamline this, those I call them errors and challenges, won't occur as readily and can be handled quickly because of our policy. There was 171. Mr. Daly, what books are no longer going back on the shelf? You said there's only 161 now? 162?
Oh, that's in the appeals, that we've whittled that down. There was some in there that the committees had approved, that we looked at and said that they violated the statute, so we overruled it. We thank the committee for their time, but we didn't take the recommendation.
Mm-hmm. There is a series of books called Heartstoppers. It is about the trials and tribulations of a gay couple in high school, going through from the beginning of their relationship to the end over a 4-volume book. Although some people might be upset about it, there's some kissing in there, but it's genuinely the way teenagers would feel and handle that situation. And it's a good book for kids who might relate to that at this point in their lives. Everybody might not like it, but it's good. Al Capone Does My Shirts. Had this in my classroom library. It's actually a really good book. And in context, it's a really good book. I'm going to admit that I had a book in my classroom that probably, now that I look back at it, I'm kind of embarrassed that it was there, but when you have a new frame and you look through a different lens, and I guess the community and our culture is changing, I look back and I think, how could I have ever put that book on the shelf? Because it was a book about a girl teaching everybody around her about drugs as she went through them in stages. And loses her virginity many times, she thinks, during these drugs, and I had that on my shelf. So it's not a perfect science, as Mr. Daly said. But the one thing I want to, I have a couple of things I want to read to you. I'm not going to tell you the titles of the book, because if we bring it to discussion, we can. But I want you to think about, number 2, materials must be suited to students' needs and ability to comprehend. I want to read this to you from a book. And I'm reading it to you because I don't comprehend what it's saying. And if that's the case, it probably shouldn't be in a library, right? I mean, if I don't understand it, how can a kid understand it? All right, so from this book, at the time, racist physicians were contrasting the bound-together clitoris of American women that goes with higher civilization and the free clitoris in negresses that goes with highly domesticated animals. Homophobic physicians were supposing that inverted lesbianism will in particularly every instance disclose an abnormally prominent clitoris, wrote New York City prison doctor somebody. Racist ideas suggesting that black people are hypersexual than white people, and homophobic ideas suggesting that queer people are more hypersexual than hypersexuals intersecting produce 2 queer racisms of the most hypersexual race, sexual black queer. This is going back on our shelf. This book, Heroin, if you don't mind. Am I gonna open a can of worms, I've been asked? Maybe. Because at some point, it's really not about lawsuits, although we need to be careful. It is about children. So in the forefront, if we're putting things back on the shelf so we don't get sued, that doesn't sit well with me if they shouldn't be back on the shelf. And I already clarified that 98% should be back on the shelf. But when you look at something like this book, Heroin, it is an entire book. I mean, hopefully you guys can read it yourself if you'd like, or take my copies. It's an entire book of drugs, more drugs, how to use drugs, how to shoot them up, melt them, snort them, have sex on them. 69. I mean, this girl spends the entire book talking about getting high and how to do it, including putting needles in your arms, syringes. Edith lets out a snort as she snorts, dribbling whiskey, sex on drugs. This book is going back on the shelf. In all good conscience, when I say 98% belong on the shelf, I am not a prude. I taught high school English. But this is not good for anybody, particularly since an entity, a person who would put this into a library and a child reads it, is not the parent. This may not be the way the parent wants their kid to learn about heroin. The last sample I had has sexually explicit content, but probably doesn't break the law. It was a book about cutting that was so invasive in my mind when I read it, so disturbing, that I felt sick. It doesn't need to be on a shelf. This wasn't a self-help book. This was just a disturbing book about a mental illness I'm not mocking. But it's not the kind of book we're going to learn from. So when we say to vote on something, and I'll be honest, this book was on our shelves, but it's not to the credit of the county. This is called My Friend Jeffrey Dahmer. In this graphic novel, he's cutting up animals, taking acid to take their skin off, cutting up people, putting them under houses in bags in the back of his car. To the credit of the county, it is not on the shelf. This does not fall under pornography rules. None of these books fall under pornography. And at some point, we might want to have a discussion about standing up to do the right thing. Because if you can get sued for taking a book off the shelf, I would think that if something bad happened to a kid after reading a book like heroin, you could get sued that way too. I mean, I think it's a both-sided. But I think we need to have, and common sense, my husband says, is not that common. It's hard to come up with common sense as a whole, right? But the community meeting they have with the community standards tells me that regardless of your political position, no matter how left or how right or how middle or how free or you are of a thinker, they literally came up with community standards that made sense for the entire group. What I'm saying as a board is, at some point, to your point, Ms. Skipper, would you want these books on your library shelves? Ms. Gilhousen, I mean, honestly, I know we don't. I don't think there's anybody in the room that wants these books on the shelf. So I actually am opening a can of worms, I guess, because I would like us at some point, maybe when we get the new lawyer, we've done a great job with number 1, but maybe at some point we need to talk about number 2 and number 3. There's 186,000 books we can choose from and millions of books we can buy. I'm just saying that these type of books don't belong on a Clay County shelf, and you would be hard pressed. You might find a couple of parents that disagree with this, but we'd be hard pressed as a community to find a big group of people that think this is the kind of stuff they want on a public school library shelf. So I will be bringing some books to discussion on Thursday, because I really would just like to hear your thoughts. I'd like you to go through maybe, and it's hard to go through all 171. I don't know the legalities, if I'm even allowed to tell you what books I'll bring to discussion. We haven't had this conversation, so they can look at them.
You can request what books you would like pulled to discussion at this meeting.
Can I send an email with the particular books that I would want to pull a discussion so you guys have the opportunity to read them? All right. So are we good with that then?
Absolutely.
And maybe in the future, when we get our new lawyer, having some conversation about protecting our kids from number 2 and number 3 as well. And I don't mean being all crazy. Trust me. All these books are fine. But some are not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. Pull out my agenda to see where we are.
We're at the,
All right. Was there any further comment on the presentation that we had from Mr. Daly? Ms. Bola, did you have anything you wanted to add? Any questions?
Not at this point, no, and I would like to see that list of books as well, thank you.
All right.
The ones that Ms. Hanson were referring to, sorry.
I'll send them.
She's planning to email. Okay, so our next item is the safety and security presentation from Chief Wagner. So at this time, before we move into that, do you have something like that?
I do. I know that that is gonna be in the shade, yeah?
Yes.
So I have questions that I should ask before shade.
Okay.
If we could
So-
even do board member comments.
Yes, that's what I was
Okay.
gonna say. We'll go straight into, before we move into the closed session, we'll go to board member comments and questions. I just wanted to address any that were pertinent to this particular discussion before we move into general questions and comments, so. All right, so we'll move on into general. You wanna start, Ms. Cooper?
Yes, there's quite a few, but these are questions that are from constituents, anybody and everybody who, some even for me, because I just want to understand. I know when I ask some questions, depends on who you ask, you get a different answer. So, and I want the board to be present to hear everything also so that the public can hear if they have any questions. And they're straightforward, there's no trick questions, they're just what we would want to know as per our school board police. So I think it would be Chief Wagner that would answer most of these, so I'm just gonna look this way though, because my neck is killing me. All right. If a fight were to break out, let's just say at any, and if this needs to be in a shade, just let me know, but I think that they're pretty general questions that they shouldn't be, or need to be. If a fight breaks out at any point at one of our schools or something major happens, and the RSO, or the RSO, oh my God, the SRO gets on the radio to call for backup, who does the SRO speak to specifically?
When they call for backup,
Yeah, like when they get on the radio, who are they talking to?
they may call for the other units that are out in the field. Sometimes there's 4 reliefs out there that will go, sometimes the supervisors will respond, and sometimes including me.
Okay.
Sometimes we call for the sheriff's office.
Right, okay.
Sometimes that happens.
Okay, so specifically, who are they speaking to on the radio? Is it you? Does it go straight to you? Is who I'm asking.
Now, these officers carry 2 radios on them. One is the police radio, which I have, it looks like that.
Okay.
Now, that goes to all the police officers. Now, specifically on a campus, they'll, in addition, have a school radio that they can communicate with. So if they're talking on the school radio, they're speaking only to the school-based staff. But if they're calling for backup, it's coming across this radio, which is monitored by our dispatch center, and all police officers hear it at the same time.
Okay. So where is our dispatch center located?
In Green Cove Springs Police Department.
Okay, and then can you walk me through the specific details of like when a call, well, I guess you kind of did. When a call goes through, let's just say, hey, I need backup. How does it go before people come in?
So if an officer were to call for backup on their radio, we actually hear it. And the dispatcher's probably logging that at the same time.
Okay.
So it's simultaneously broadcast, so everybody can hear it all at the same time. And just like in all my years, I didn't need a dispatcher to tell me to go. I can hear an officer come up on the radios. Because I'll go back to way long time ago as a beat deputy running around here in Clay County. When your beat partner calls for help, you know about where they're at, and you're running to them. And if you need clarification, the dispatcher will tell you, this officer's at so-and-so location, and then you're on your way there. With us, it's a little bit different because there's 43 different locations, and you know these folks' voices, so you know where you're going.
Okay. Now, if there were like an alleged rape, these are some are scenarios, some are just straight up questions, and in a bathroom at a school campus, who does the investigation?
We do.
Okay. And then how many times would that victim, can you walk me through how many times that victim would have to repeat their story? Because ultimately, does it end with you? Does it have to go to Clay County? I just want to know how many times they would have to repeat them.
So when it comes to cases of sexual assault or anything, it is age appropriate. Now, when you have smaller children, you'll do what's called a CPT, a Child Protection Team interview. Those are usually open-ended questions versus a child that's maybe 16, 17 years old who can articulate. Now, when those come down, it's multifaceted. So the police take the initial report. Sometimes the state attorney's office will want to ask those questions themselves and understand their credibility and understand all the dynamics, because they're the one that ultimately are going to prosecute a case. So it could be a couple times, but I can tell you, when you're dealing with a small one, you can only interview that child 3 times.
Okay.
Small children.
Okay. And then who collects evidence if there is any evidence? Would that be you?
We collect evidence.
Okay.
Sometimes if there's a complex case that maybe needs a little bit more forensic technology, we may call upon FDLE, we may call the sheriff's office, or the other 2 partnering agency. But by far, most evidence collection is very simple.
Okay.
And then that's stored in a property room here in Green Cove Springs in our facility.
Yeah, I saw that one. Okay. If there were an active shooter on campus, are other resources pooled to respond immediately from other schools?
Yes, especially with the implementation of the additional officer or guardians that are coming on board. That's going to help that response, because one, we're going to have resources that are to flood the area, as well as still be in compliance with the law to have a safe school officer on that campus. Plus, those surrounding campuses are probably going to go into lockdown should we have something significant like that.
Okay. And then at this point, how will Clay County Sheriff's Department get involved or be notified, I guess?
They can actually hear our radios. We're all jointly connected. I can switch over to the sheriff's office. This is a simple click of the button. I'm already on their frequency. I can actually talk to them. The dispatchers and there's 3 different dispatch centers within Clay County. Green Cove Springs happens to do a combined dispatch with us. The sheriff's office has a dispatch center, and also so does Orange Park Police. One thing, a vital piece that I'm missing out of that is Clay County Fire Rescue. We're all in the county system. Everybody's mutually connected through this radio. I have everybody's frequency,
Okay.
including Duval School Police.
Okay. Hopefully we don't need that. So let's just say everybody responds. How would you communicate with each other? Would you still use that frequency? How do you communicate with other agencies when they respond? Let's just say we have a school shooting and they come in. How are you going to communicate with them?
So that could happen in a myriad of ways. There are mutual aid frequencies on our radio, but what would be communicated through the incident commander would designate an exact frequency we would all go to, so we're all talking on the same channel. It's a matter of even the sheriff's office, us, Orange Park, Green Cove, Florida Highway Patrol, we can all, and then the system also has the capabilities of patching. For example, if St. Johns County were to come over, our dispatch centers can patch their frequencies to our frequencies and immediately speak.
Okay. Other than what is required by the law and the state, what have you done to keep our schools safe additionally? Yes.
That will probably have to go in the shade.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Okay, and these are just like some, I guess, purchasing things. How many different types of handguns have we purchased since the department was started?
We've purchased one brand, and we bought 2 different models. And now we are the ones that equip, when we purchase more handguns, we now provide those firearms to the guardians, because we saw some things and we wanted to have that control to make sure that firearm is readily available and serviced properly, so we took that responsibility.
Okay. I don't really know, I guess, I don't know if this is to you or Doc. How much do our cars cost?
A lot now.
Before they're out, like logoed and
So
stuff?
back in when all the cars were purchased in 2019, the car was about $23,000 without any equipment on it.
Okay.
The striping on it was about $1,500 because it's just a plain car. It just happens to come, that particular car comes black. When you order it, whether you buy it black, green, white, whatever have you, it's the color that you order. Then it has a striping package, just like if you look at the sheriff's office or Orange Park or anything, all that is a striping. It's a bunch of stickers on the car. And then the other equipment, the cage and the light, I think at that time, that car was about $27,000 total when it was completely outfitted. But the supervisor cars didn't have all that. They had inside lights, so it didn't cost as much. That car was somewhere around 24-ish, 25-ish, somewhere around there. It didn't cost as much. What's that?
State contract.
And it's all on state contract. So everything was purchased under the Florida Sheriff's Association state contract.
Okay. Do we use them to transport individuals to jail?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, sometimes we arrest adults and sometimes children have to be arrested.
Okay. Who covers the school while the officer takes the individual to jail?
We have other relief officers that will go out there. Sometimes that relief officer will transport that person and leave the original officer there.
Okay.
Because there may be additional things that need to be taken care of. So it's pretty simple to put somebody in a car and transport them.
And is that relief officer our officer?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have radar guns?
Yes. Well, we have lasers.
Okay.
I don't have radar and laser are two different things. We purchased 4 of them for traffic enforcement.
Okay.
And then we're also getting some radars that are being passed to us from the Florida Highway Patrol.
How long have we had them?
Which ones?
The
lasers?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Whatever.
I did a Facebook post on it with Miss Bola out at Oakley. Maybe 2 years? 2 years, something like that?
Have we written any tickets in the
Yes.
time that we've had them?
Yes,
In school, in the school zones?
yes. I've written a ticket myself.
Okay. Do we know how many?
Miss Bola, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, when we did that in Skipper, I went out just to learn how to use that laser and to see if it was effective, and it was amazing to see what people were doing through school zones. Very eye-opening. So, just a comment.
So just in the 2 years, we've written 16 tickets that I was able to pull data on. We have an initiative between, if the traffic complaints come into the sheriff's office, because some of these traffic complaints, because Florida law allows school safety officers, which we are, to enforce traffic laws on or about the properties of the school district. But in addition, our MOU with the sheriff's office extends that to 1,000 feet, so we have definition. So we're out there, when we have a big problem, we had a big sweep when we did at Fleming Island High School. So we probably upset a few residents over there with their problems.
Ms. Skipper, can I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
just curious. Is it a Clay County School Board ticket and we get the money? Is it, what kind of a
Well,
ticket? What is a ticket?
so the ticket, unfortunately, the majority of citation, when you break down what a citation
Yeah.
is, the majority is clerk costs. Some of the funds, when you look at the breakdown, you got court costs.
Yeah.
You have law enforcement trust fund, and then if it's written in a municipality, because there's 2 blocks on the top,
Yeah.
it'll say county and city, and you have to put those codes in there. It actually goes to the county or to the city. It doesn't go to a political
But
subdivision.
we're writing a Clay County School Board ticket?
No, it's a Florida Uniform Traffic Citation.
Oh, okay.
We get those tickets, we order them from
Okay.
Department of
I
Highway.
just didn't know, I was just curious.
Yeah. There's really no money in them, really,
I'm just wondering.
other than to the clerk.
Have we purchased any shields?
We have not. We are in the process of looking at the shields now, and then we are placing those shields in strategic places.
Okay. Have we purchased any rifles?
Yes, those were original purchase back in 2019.
How many?
50,
And how often do we train with them?
at least annually.
Okay.
Let me clarify my question, or my answer. We qualify at least annually. Training is more, because there's a lot of things that are used in that rifle, such as single person response to active assailant. That is also used.
How would you describe how we follow up with victims and parents? Hold on. With crimes or incidences that have occurred during school? How do we follow up with them?
Well, there is statutory requirements. If a child is taken into custody, you have to notify parents. But customarily, if a child is involved in an incident, it's customary to call a parent and say, your child was a witness, your child is a suspect, your child is a victim. Sometimes we need them to come in. And then I require, when the officers write police reports on those incidents, that those communications are documented.
Okay. How are our relationships with, how is the relationships, hold on. What type of relationship does the school board police department have with principals at their schools?
Very good. I mean, there's always, by far, there's always some type of personality conflict, and sometimes we resolve those by having communication about those, but by far, a lot of them get along extremely well.
Okay.
Because that partnership transcends far beyond just a police school administrator. They have to work collaboratively together for the safety and security of those campuses. And it should always be an open line of communication.
Okay. Again, these weren't all mine, these are just.
No, I'm glad we're getting them out.
And then we know that the school board police is in the process of getting accredited. When did we submit this process to start it? And yeah, when did we submit it?
I believe I submitted the initial application back in December. Mr. Bickner's been pretty busy lately. It's going through the contract review, because there is a fee associated with that has to be paid. So I have to go through the contract review process for that. I did recently get an email back from, it's actually through the state, and said, hey, we saw that you submitted your application, where are you guys at? I haven't responded to that yet until I actually speak with Mr. Bickner where he's at, and in agreeing to the terms. I think it's in my opinion, I think it's very simple terms of how to do it, but I need the grand blessing through the practices here in the district that it gets approved.
So we technically haven't started it, we just applied the paperwork.
Well, when we say technically started it, I have started it, because accreditation is all about policy, okay? And all your policies are establish what you do and how you do it. Then the accreditation part is you have to submit proofs of compliance, proof of standards. For example, an internal affairs complaint, how you receive an internal affairs complaint, how you investigate that complaint, and did you respond to the complaint and on the outcomes. That's just an example. And then when you look at the policy and that there's those standards in there, then you show proof of compliance that, well, here's the standard for this, and this is the letter we sent to Mrs. Smith regarding the complaint on Officer Blue.
Okay. Why are we just now starting this? Why haven't we done it sooner?
Pretty busy process getting it started in 2019, getting everything established. I mean, we did this in about 5 months. We got it up and running as we continue to hone and perfect some things that, inevitably, we're always in a continuous improvement. I can go back and look at what I started versus what I did today, far different. Nothing's ever perfect, but it was always a goal of mine to become accredited.
So let me ask a follow-up question. Are all law enforcement agencies in Clay County accredited?
They are not.
Who's not accredited?
Orange Park and Green Cove Springs, what I understand from Green Cove Springs, they too are in the process of becoming accredited. The sheriff's office has been accredited since I started. They originally had CALIA accreditation, now they're state accredited, and they're going through their accreditation process right now.
Ken, do you also have to be in first operation for 3 years, correct, before you can start the
Yes.
process?
Because you do have to have, accreditation proofs, and there's 1 year and 3 year type sampling. So we're going into our 4th year, or just past our 4th year now.
Okay. And so you kind of touched on this a little bit, but in layman terms, can you explain what law enforcement accreditation is as it pertains to an agency accreditation and what it means for the agency?
Accreditation simply, and it's kind of same thing for a school district when they get accredited. Your policies, you work with what your policies say, and you prove that you're doing what your policies say. So as your policies are established, that they're the best practice in law enforcement, because law enforcement in K-12 environment are a little bit different. While there are a lot of similarities, there are a lot of differences. So at the end of the day, your policy is what establishes what you do. When your policies are lawful, they follow the best practices of today, they can help prevent litigation later on.
Okay. If a criminal complaint were ever reported against an SRO, how would it be handled?
What I would do is to take out the impartiality of that. I would either look to the sheriff's office, or even the 2 municipal police departments, or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. As an example, we currently have an MOU in place with Florida Department of Law Enforcement for officer-involved shootings.
Have we had any internal investigations?
Yes.
Are you allowed to tell me how many? And
Yes,
20, well, how many?
Since inception, probably 4 or 5 of them.
And what were their outcomes?
They resigned in lieu of termination.
Okay. Well, I guess that you answered that one. Have we ever had someone who was terminated or resigned under investigation? So would
Yes.
that be, okay.
That's a yes.
And then do we know the turnover rate?
And there's an additional caveat to that too. We're also required to report to the state, the Department of Education, Office of Safe School, of any safe school officer that is disciplined or involved in misconduct. We're required to report that too, and to the sheriff.
Okay. And do we know our turnover rate for the police department since we started?
Oh goodness. I'm not sure. I think we probably replaced about 20 officers since inception.
Okay. And then, has anyone ever come back after leaving?
Yes.
Okay. And then, this last question I have, can you explain to me essentially who you report to and your chain of command, how it works?
Bryce Ellis, the operations, Assistant Superintendent Operations, is my direct supervisor. Ultimately, I do report to the superintendent of exactly what's going on.
Okay. That's it.
But when it comes to actual criminal cases, the content of them, sometimes they have to get excluded. Until that time I can publicly talk about them. I will always discuss about direct safety, because it's required that anything that directs the safety and welfare of the students, the superintendent and the principal will be notified. Because all the things that go on, like the robocalls that go out, that's a 3-way call between me, him, and Terry. That's how we get those communications out quickly. Or not quickly to some, but as quickly as we can.
That's it.
Good.
All right, thank you.
All right.
So Madam Chair, if I could point out the time frame and where we're at and all of that, so I'm not sure how you want to
Yes.
do this.
So we have interviews beginning at 1 o'clock. It's now noon. If there's any further comment or questions from board members, we'll hear it now, hopefully quickly. Did you have something, Ms. Bola?
Are you still doing the meeting in the shade?
We are,
We are.
yes, we still have to do that as well.
Okay, I'm going to pass on that since I've already gone through the briefing from Chief previously. And I'm going to go charge my phone so that I have plenty of charge for the questions this afternoon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Ms. Bola. Anything further?
We'll reconvene at 1, correct?
Yes, at 1 o'clock, we'll call you back in. All right, anything further? All right, so at this time, we will move to our shade meeting.
Okay, so then, why don't we give 5 minutes for everybody to get out?
Yes, I imagine it does.
Okay, about 4 o'clock.
I'll write it down.